"You look familiar," the CEO said to the single dad janitor. Then he told her something so shocking about the bracelet on his wrist that her security team lunged forward and her entire world flipped upside down. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The early morning silence wrapped around Eli Turner like a familiar blanket as he guided his mop across the gleaming marble floor of Lawson Technologies' lobby. The gentle swishing sound echoed through the vast space, keeping time with the hymn he hummed under his breath. At 42 stories high, the glass and steel building stood as Austin's crown jewel of innovation. But at 4:45 a.m., it was just another quiet place where Eli could lose himself in honest work. He paused to wipe his brow, his weathered hands adjusting the name tag on his gray uniform. The fluorescent lights caught the silver bracelet on his wrist, a constant reminder of second chances and answered prayers. His thoughts drifted to Maya, Shirley still curled up in her bed 3 blocks away, with Mrs. Palmer watching over her from the next room. "Lord, keep her breathing easy tonight," he whispered, as he did every morning. The lobby security guard, Tom, nodded respectfully from his post. They shared the same shift for 2 years now, speaking little but understanding much. Both men knew the value of steady work and quiet dignity. Eli's mop moved in practice circles, erasing the previous day's footprints. He'd learned long ago that proper mopping wasn't about muscle, it was about patience and attention to detail. The same patience that helped him endure 3 years behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. The same attention to detail that let him spot when Maya's breathing grew, labored before an attack. His phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from Mrs. Palmer. "Maya slept through the night. No coughing. God is good." Eli smiled, warmth spreading through his chest. These small victories meant everything. He typed back a quick "thank you" before returning to his work, his movements more energetic now. The lobby's marble expanse still stretched before him, but Eli didn't mind. Each sweep of the mop meant another dollar toward Maya's medical bills. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, something he'd learned to treasure after the conviction that had stripped away his career as a mechanic. The memory of that time still stung. He'd been younger then, working at a high-end auto shop that serviced corporate fleets. Someone had needed a fall guy for a fraud scheme, and Eli, with his simple trust and clean record, had fit the bill perfectly. By the time the dust settled, his name was ruined, his savings gone, and his wife had left, unable to bear the shame. But God had other plans, Eli reminded himself. The same week he'd gotten out of prison, he'd found Maya, just a sick baby then, and Mrs. Palmer, who'd believed in second chances. Together, they'd built something like a family. "Hey, Eli," Tom called softly from his desk. "Coffee's fresh if you want some." "Thanks, brother." Eli leaned his mop against the wall and walked over to pour a cup. The familiar scent of break room coffee somehow smelled better at this hour. They shared a comfortable silence, 2 men who understood the grace of simple moments. Through the lobby's glass walls, the stars were just beginning to fade as dawn crept closer. "Maya doing better?" Tom asked, knowing about the recent hospital visit. "Much better, thank God. That new medication's helping." Eli sipped his coffee, savoring its warmth. "Mrs. Palmer says she slept through the night." "That's good to hear." Tom smiled. "She's a fighter, that one." "Just like her daddy," a gentle voice added. Mrs. Palmer always said Maya had inherited Eli's strength, though he'd never seen himself as particularly strong. Just blessed with enough faith to keep going. Eli returned to his mopping, his movements measured and thorough. He had a system. Start from the back corner, work toward the front doors, leave no streak behind. There was peace and routine in knowing exactly what needed to be done and doing it well. The bracelet clinked softly against the mop handle as he worked. He never took it off, not since that day in Honduras when a dying stranger had pressed it into his palm, along with a promise to protect baby Maya. The memory was both bitter and sweet, like so many of life's most important moments. Through the windows, the sky began to lighten, painting the lobby in soft grays and blues. Eli checked his watch. 5:15 a.m. He was making good time. Soon the early birds would start trickling in, young programmers with their laptops and executives with their leather briefcases. None would notice him, and that was fine. Invisibility had its own kind of peace. He was finishing the last section when he heard it, the distinctive purr of a luxury car pulling up to the curb. Through the glass doors, he saw the sleek black vehicle that everyone knew belonged to Rebecca Lawson herself, the CEO who'd turned her father's struggling company into a tech empire. Eli kept his head down, focusing on his work as he'd learned to do. Important people preferred janitors to be like good stagehands, necessary but unseen. He heard the click of heels on pavement, then the soft whoosh of the automatic doors. But instead of the usual brisk footsteps passing by, there was silence. Eli looked up, finding himself caught in the direct gaze of Rebecca Lawson. She stood perfectly still, her designer briefcase forgotten at her side, staring at him with an intensity that made him want to check if he'd missed a spot on the floor. "You look familiar," she said softly, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet lobby. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with something Eli couldn't name. He held his mop tighter, suddenly unsure of what to do with his hands. She kept staring, as if trying to place his face in a memory that wouldn't quite come into focus. Rebecca Lawson stood motionless in the lobby, her perfectly manicured fingers pressed against her lips as she studied Eli's face with an intensity that made the air feel charged. The morning light streaming through the towering glass walls cast long, dramatic shadows across the pristine marble floor, making the moment feel suspended in time like a photograph waiting to be developed. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Rebecca's usual confidence, the kind that commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions without hesitation, seemed to falter as she searched Eli's features for something she couldn't quite name. Michael Grant, her head of security, maintained his position exactly 2 steps behind her left shoulder. His broad shoulders were squared, his stance ready and alert, a habit drilled into him during his military days that had never quite left him, even in civilian clothes. Though his weathered face remained neutral and professional, his sharp eyes tracked every subtle movement in the lobby, cataloging exits and potential threats with the efficiency of a man who had made survival an art form. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Eli said quietly, his voice gentle but firm, carrying the kind of respect that came naturally to him. "You must be thinking of someone else." He adjusted his grip on the worn mop handle, trying to appear casual despite the unwanted attention that made his skin prickle with discomfort. The metal cleaning cart beside him, loaded with supplies and rags, suddenly felt like a protective barrier between 2 very different worlds. His world of early mornings and honest work, and hers of corner offices and corporate power. Rebecca shook her head slightly, her tailored charcoal suit rustling with the movement. The fabric was expensive, perfectly fitted, the kind that whispered success with every step. "No, there's something." She took a deliberate step closer, her designer heels clicking against the freshly mopped floor with sharp, echoing sounds that seemed to bounce off the marble walls. "Your eyes, perhaps? The way they crinkle when you speak? Or maybe the way you hold yourself?" Eli maintained his polite smile, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He'd spent the last several years perfecting the delicate art of being invisible, of blending seamlessly into the background of other people's lives. It was a survival skill he'd learned the hard way, how to be helpful without being noticed, how to do his job without drawing attention to his past. Now, under Rebecca's intense scrutiny, he felt as exposed as if she'd turned a spotlight directly on him. "I've been working here for almost 2 years now," he offered, hopefully, his voice steady despite his racing pulse. "The night shift, mostly. Maybe you've seen me in passing during one of your early mornings?" "No," Rebecca said, more to herself than to him, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It's different than that, deeper, like a memory I can't quite reach, something important that's just beyond." Her voice trailed off abruptly as she noticed something that made her freeze mid-sentence, her breath catching audibly in her throat. The morning sunlight, now stronger and more golden as it climbed higher, had caught the silver bracelet on Eli's wrist as he shifted the mop handle to his other hand. The metal gleamed in the light, drawing Rebecca's gaze like a magnet, her eyes fixed on it with laser focus, and all the color drained from her face in a matter of seconds, leaving her looking pale and shaken. Michael tensed immediately, his body responding to the sudden change in her demeanor with military precision. His hand didn't move toward his weapon, there was no obvious threat, but his entire posture shifted into a higher state of readiness, like a coiled spring waiting to release. Eli followed her horrified, gazed down to his wrist, suddenly understanding the source of her reaction. The worn silver band had become such an integral part of him over the years that he sometimes forgot it was there, like a second skin. But now, under her stare, it felt foreign and heavy. The carefully engraved initials DL caught the morning light, seeming to glow against his tan skin like a beacon. "That bracelet?" Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible, so quiet that Eli had to strain to hear her. Her usual commanding presence, the kind that filled rooms and demanded attention, crumbled like ancient paper. replaced by something raw and vulnerable and deeply wounded. Those initials. The spacious lobby grew impossibly quiet, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Even the gentle, constant hum of the building's ventilation system seemed muted, distant. Tom, the overnight security guard, had risen slowly from his desk by the main entrance. His weathered face creased with concern as he sensed the dramatic shift in atmosphere. His years of experience told him that something significant was unfolding, even if he couldn't understand what. Michael took a careful half-step forward, positioning himself closer to Rebecca without making any sudden movements. His hand remained relaxed at his side, but his posture made it crystal clear that he was prepared for anything. Years of high-stakes protection detail had taught him to read volatile situations before they fully developed, and right now, every one of his finely tuned instincts was screaming that this was a moment that could change everything. "Where did you get that?" Rebecca's question cut through the heavy silence like a blade, sharp with barely contained emotion and something that sounded dangerously close to desperation. Eli's fingers tightened involuntarily around the mop handle until his knuckles went white. The familiar weight of the bracelet suddenly felt enormous on his wrist, as if it were made of lead instead of silver. His mind raced frantically through his limited options, knowing with absolute certainty that his next words could change everything, not just this moment, but his entire carefully constructed life. The quiet routine that kept Maya safe, the anonymity that protected them both from his past, the fragile peace they'd built together, it all balanced precariously on whatever he said next. The guards stationed strategically around the marble lobby had begun moving closer with measured, deliberate steps. They formed a loose but definite circle around the three central figures, not threatening exactly, but definitely present and alert. Eli could feel their eyes on him, calculating and assessing, weighing him for potential danger. The weight of their collective attention pressed down on him like a physical force. His throat felt parched as he stood there, caught between Rebecca's increasingly intense gaze and the slowly closing circle of professional security personnel. The simple mop in his calloused hands was no longer just a cleaning tool, it had become an anchor, something solid and familiar to hold on to as his carefully constructed world of blessed invisibility began to crack and crumble around him. Rebecca waited for his answer with the patience of someone who had learned that silence could be more powerful than words. Her eyes never left the silver band that had once meant everything to her, the same bracelet she thought she'd buried, along with her hopes and dreams 12 long years ago, in a cemetery plot that had never actually held a body, only an empty casket and a heart full of unanswered questions. The morning sun continued its steady rise outside the glass walls, painting the Texas sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold and orange, promising another day of blazing heat. But inside the air-conditioned lobby, time seemed to stand perfectly still. Eli Turner, the quiet janitor who had always managed to fade into the background like a ghost, now stood unwillingly at the very center of attention, his most carefully guarded secret about to unravel in the growing light of dawn. The glass-walled office on the top floor of Lawson Technologies felt vast and eerily quiet. Eli Turner sat rigidly in one of the modern leather chairs, his work uniform looking out of place against the pristine surroundings. His calloused hands rested in his lap, the silver bracelet now absent from his wrist. Across the sprawling desk, Rebecca Lawson turned the bracelet over and over in her hands. The morning sun caught the engraved initials, DL, making them shimmer. Two security guards stood near the door, their faces professionally blank, but eyes alert. "Please," Rebecca said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "Tell me everything about this bracelet." Eli cleared his throat, glancing at the guards before focusing on Rebecca. "It was 12 years ago, in Honduras. I was there with my wife Maria. She was from a small village called Las Flores." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "Maria had just given birth to our daughter Maya. There was a massive storm that night, the worst anyone had seen in decades." His voice grew quieter. The river broke its banks. The whole village was flooding. Rebecca leaned forward slightly, her fingers tightening around the bracelet. "We were trying to reach higher ground," Eli continued. "Maria, she was still weak from childbirth. The water was rising so fast." He blinked hard, his shoulders tense with old grief. That's when he appeared, the missionary, David. Rebecca's breath caught audibly. One of the guards shifted his weight, but remained silent. "He helped us through the rushing water, carrying Maya while I supported Maria. We were almost to safety when..." Eli's voice cracked. "The bridge collapsed. Maria slipped. I tried to hold on to her, but the current..." He stopped, pressing his lips together. Rebecca's face had gone pale, but her eyes never left Eli's face. "Go on," she whispered. David handed Maya to a rescue worker, then jumped in after us. He managed to push me toward a rope someone had thrown down. "But Maria?" Eli shook his head slowly. "By the time I got to shore, David was still trying to reach her. The last thing I saw was him fighting the current, then the floodwaters just." He made a helpless gesture with his hands. Tears were flowing freely down Rebecca's cheeks now. She placed the bracelet carefully on her desk, her movements deliberate, as if handling something infinitely precious. Before he went in, Eli said softly, he took off the bracelet and pressed it into my hand, said something about it being a reminder that God's grace finds us in our darkest moments. I didn't even know his last name until today. Rebecca stood abruptly, walking to the wall of windows. The Austin skyline stretched out before her, but her gaze was distant, seeing something far away and long ago. "I searched for months," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The aid organizations, the local authorities, no one could tell me exactly what happened, just that he died helping others during the flood." She pressed her palm against the cool glass. "That was David, always putting others first. He'd left his engineering career to do missionary work, said he needed to make a real difference in the world." Eli stood slowly, his work boots quiet against the plush carpet. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. I never knew. I would have tried to find his family, to return it." "No," Rebecca cut him off, turning back to face him. Her makeup was smudged, but there was something fierce in her expression. "He gave it to you. He wanted you to have it." Eli looked down at his rough hands that had carried that silver reminder of grace for 12 years. "Still, it belongs to you now. I know how precious it must be." Rebecca walked back to her desk, picking up the bracelet. The silence in the office felt heavy with the weight of their shared connection to a man who had died saving others. "You're the one he saved," she whispered, staring at the bracelet as if it held all the answers she'd spent years searching for. The morning sun continued to rise over Austin, streaming through the windows and filling the office with golden light. In that moment, the CEO and the janitor stood connected by a simple silver bracelet and the memory of a man whose final act of courage had changed both their lives forever. Rebecca sat alone in her office, the morning sun now higher in the sky. Her secretary's voice crackled through the intercom. "Miss Lawson, your 9 a.m. is waiting. Cancel everything until noon." Rebecca replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She opened her laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard for a moment before typing Eli Turner into the search bar. The results painted a fragmented picture. News articles from 8 years ago detailed a corporate fraud case at Maxwell Industries. Eli Turner, then a promising mechanical engineer, had been convicted of tampering with safety inspection records. The conviction had cost him his career, his savings, and nearly his freedom. But something felt wrong. Rebecca dug deeper, her analytical mind picking apart the case details. The evidence had been circumstantial at best. One article mentioned Eli maintaining his innocence throughout the trial, even when a plea deal was offered. He'd lost everything rather than admit to a lie. She leaned back in her chair, running her fingers through her perfectly styled hair. The morning's discovery of the bracelet had cracked her carefully maintained composure. Now, learning about Eli's past only intensified her turmoil. Here was a man who'd suffered injustice, yet when speaking of David, her David, his eyes had shown only gratitude. Down in the parking garage, Eli climbed into his weathered Toyota. His hand still trembled slightly as he started the engine. The morning's events felt surreal, like a dream he couldn't quite shake. He thought of the bracelet, now back with its rightful owner, and felt strangely lighter. The drive home took him through modest neighborhoods where small houses sat close together, their tiny yards neat but sparse. He pulled into the driveway of a small blue house with peeling paint. Before he could reach the door, it flew open. "Daddy!" Maya burst out, her dark curls bouncing. Despite her excitement, her breathing was slightly labored, a reminder of her condition that made Eli's heart ache. Mrs. Palmer, their elderly neighbor, appeared in the doorway. "She's been waiting by the window for the last hour," she said with a warm smile. "How was work, Eli?" "Different," he replied simply, lifting Maya into his arms. "Thank you for watching her, Mrs. Palmer." Inside, Maya settled at their small kitchen table while Eli made her breakfast. She watched him with curious eyes, swinging her legs. "Daddy, who was the pretty lady at work? The one you told Mrs. Palmer about?" Eli nearly dropped the bowl he was holding. You were listening to Grown Up Talk, weren't you? Maya grinned, showing the gap where her front tooth had recently fallen out. Mrs. Palmer said you met someone important. Was she nice? Did she like your stories? She was very nice, Eli said carefully, setting a bowl of oatmeal with sliced bananas, Maya's favorite, in front of her. But it's complicated, sweetheart. Everything's complicated with grown-ups, Maya declared with the wisdom of her 7 years. She took a spoonful of oatmeal. But you look different today, Daddy. Happy different. Eli paused, surprised by his daughter's perception. The morning's events had shaken him, but perhaps there was something else too, a feeling of being truly seen for the first time in years. Across town, in her penthouse apartment, Rebecca stood before a wall of built-in shelves. She reached for a leather-bound photo album, its pages thick with memories. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. There, preserved behind clear plastic, was a photo from 12 years ago. David stood on a beach at sunset, his kind eyes crinkled with laughter. The silver bracelet glinted on his wrist, the same bracelet she'd held in her office hours earlier. He'd been wearing it the day he left for Honduras, promising to return in time for their wedding. Rebecca traced the outline of his face through the plastic. "You saved them?" she whispered. "You saved them, and I never knew." She thought of Eli Turner, the quiet janitor with David's same gentle eyes. A man who'd faced injustice but somehow maintained his dignity. A father who worked nights to care for a sick daughter. The last person her David had helped before dying. A final act of grace that had rippled through years to reach her today. Maya's words from breakfast echoed in Eli's mind as he tucked her into bed that evening. Her room was small but filled with drawings, bright splashes of color on every wall. Her latest creation showed what looked like an angel watching over a little house. "That's us," she explained sleepily, pointing to the house. "And that's our guardian angel. Mrs. Palmer says everybody has one." Eli smoothed her curls back from her forehead. "Is that right?" "Mm-hmm." Maya's eyes were already closing. "Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart? You look happy today," she murmured, drifting off to sleep. Eli sat on the edge of her bed, watching her peaceful face in the soft glow of her nightlight. She was right. Something had changed today. Something that felt like the first ray of dawn after a very long night. In her elegant bedroom across town, Rebecca sat at her vanity, the photo album open before her. The image of David smiled up at her, the silver bracelet forever frozen in time on his wrist. She touched the precious metal now resting on her own wrist, feeling closer to him than she had in years. The next morning, whispers filled the sleek hallways of Lawson Technologies. Employees huddled around coffee machines and water coolers, their voices dropping to hushed tones whenever someone walked by. The story of the CEO's emotional meeting with the night janitor spread like wildfire through the building's 20 floors. "I heard she was crying in her office," one marketing assistant whispered to another. "Someone said he had something that belonged to her dead fiancé," another added. By mid-morning, Sarah Chen from Human Resources had fielded dozens of curious inquiries about Eli Turner. The security team that had witnessed the encounter remained tight-lipped, but their serious expressions only fueled speculation. Jennifer Martinez, a local reporter known for her human interest stories, sat at her desk across town when her phone buzzed. A text from her source at Lawson Technologies caught her attention. "Big story here. CEO Rebecca Lawson had emotional breakdown with janitor. Something about her dead fiancé." Jennifer's journalistic instincts tingled. Rebecca Lawson rarely made headlines except for business achievements. A personal story about the famously private CEO could be huge. In her office, Rebecca stared at her computer screen, reading the 5th email about yesterday's events. Her PR team had already contacted her, concerned about maintaining the company's professional image. She touched the silver bracelet, now resting on her desk, its surface catching the morning light. Making a decision, she pressed the intercom. "Linda, please locate Eli Turner's contact information and set up a meeting for this afternoon." 3 hours later, Eli sat nervously in one of the plush chairs facing Rebecca's desk. He'd changed into his best clothes, a clean button-down shirt and pressed khakis, but still felt out of place among the modern furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows. "The story's getting out," Rebecca said directly. "About yesterday, about David's bracelet." Eli shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry if I caused trouble." "No," Rebecca cut him off gently. "You've done nothing wrong, but I think this is an opportunity." She leaned forward, her expression softening. "David deserves to be remembered. His sacrifice, his courage, people should know about it. Would you be willing to share your story at a press conference? Eli's first instinct was to decline. He'd spent years trying to stay invisible, keeping his head down, protecting Maya from unwanted attention. But as he looked at Rebecca's hopeful expression, he remembered that morning in Honduras. He remembered David's last words, "Make it count." "Yes, before today," he said quietly. "For David. He saved more than just my life that day." The press conference was scheduled for the following morning. Rebecca's PR team worked through the night, preparing statements and briefing both Rebecca and Eli. They chose the company's main conference room, with its dramatic views of the Austin skyline. By 9 a.m., the room was packed with reporters and cameras. Eli stood backstage, tugging at his new suit collar, a gift from Rebecca that he'd tried to refuse. His hands were clammy, his heart racing. Through the curtain, he could hear the murmur of voices and the clicks of cameras being readied. Rebecca approached him, looking elegant in a navy dress. "Are you ready?" Eli nodded, though his throat felt dry. "Maya made me promise to wave at her. She'll be watching the live stream with Mrs. Palmer." Rebecca smiled, touching his arm briefly. "You're doing a wonderful thing, Eli. David would be proud." They walked onto the stage together, camera flashes immediately erupting around them. Rebecca stepped to the podium first, her posture perfect, her voice clear and strong. 12 years ago, I lost someone very dear to me," she began. "David Lawson was more than my fiancé. He was a man who lived his beliefs. He left a successful engineering career to serve others, eventually giving his life to save strangers during a flood in Honduras." She paused, her composed facade cracking slightly. "For years, I thought I knew the end of his story. I was wrong." She gestured to Eli, who stepped forward. The cameras whirred and clicked. "This is Eli Turner. 2 days ago, I noticed him wearing a silver bracelet, David's bracelet. Through an incredible twist of fate, I learned that Eli was one of the people David saved that day. He and his newborn daughter were the last people David helped before the flood took him." Eli approached the microphone, his voice quiet but steady. "I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for David Lawson. Neither would my daughter." He touched the spot on his wrist where the bracelet had been. "He gave me this bracelet just before. He swallowed hard. He said it was to remind me that grace comes when we least expect it, but need it most." The room had grown completely silent, reporters captivated by the story. Even the most cynical journalists found themselves moved by the genuine emotion in both speakers' voices. Rebecca returned to the podium. "In David's honor, Lawson Technologies will be establishing a foundation to support disaster relief efforts and aid workers in Central America. We want to ensure that David's spirit of service lives on." "Excuse me?" A voice cut through the respectful silence. A reporter in the third row stood up, his tablet computer glowing in his hands. "Isn't this the same Eli Turner who was convicted of corporate fraud at Maxwell Industries 8 years ago?" The room erupted in murmurs and camera clicks. Eli felt the blood drain from his face as every lens turned toward him. Rebecca's hands gripped the podium tighter, but before she could speak, more questions burst forth. "How can we trust this story? Was this whole thing staged? Mr. Turner, did you approach Miss Lawson with this story?" The peaceful, almost sacred atmosphere of moments before shattered like glass. Eli stood frozen under the harsh lights, feeling the weight of every suspicious stare, every accusatory lens. The silence that followed felt like an eternity, broken only by the rapid-fire clicks of cameras capturing his shock and Rebecca's rigid posture. By sunrise, Eli Turner's peaceful anonymity had shattered. His face stared back at him from dozens of news websites, each headline more sensational than the last. "Miracle meeting or elaborate con?" blazed one. "CEO's dead fiancé connected to ex-con janitor," screamed another. In his tiny kitchen, Eli's hands trembled as he set down his coffee mug. Maya's Cheerios sat untouched in their bowl, milk growing warm. She kept glancing at her father's phone, which wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. "Daddy, why is your picture everywhere?" Maya asked, her small fingers fidgeting with her spoon. Eli tried to smile, but his eyes betrayed his worry. "Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups get confused about things. It'll blow over soon." The walk to Maya's school felt longer than usual. Parents who normally smiled now whispered behind raised hands. Maya's grip on his hand tightened when they passed a group of her classmates, who pointed and giggled. "Hey, Maya, is your dad really a bad guy?" one boy shouted. Eli quickened their pace, his jaw clenched. Maya's bottom lip trembled, but she held her head high, just like he'd taught her. At Lawson Technologies, the morning brought chaos. Rebecca sat in the emergency board meeting, her usually pristine appearance showing signs of strain. Arthur Davidson, the lead board member, paced the conference room like a caged lion. "This is a PR nightmare, Rebecca?" Arthur's voice boomed. "A convicted fraudster? Working in our building? With access to sensitive areas?" "His conviction was years ago," Rebecca defended, "and our background checks cleared him for basic employment." "Basic employment?" Another board member scoffed. "You've made him the face of our company's biggest human interest story in years." Rebecca's phone buzzed. Another message from her PR team. The story had gone viral. Number Lawson Janitor was trending. "He's manipulating you." Arthur leaned forward, his voice softening to false concern. "Using your emotional connection to David to gain influence. It's textbook con artistry." Rebecca stood abruptly, her chair rolling backward. "You didn't see his eyes when he told that story." "You didn't exactly," Arthur cut in. "Emotions. That's all this is." By afternoon, Eli's world had completely unraveled. Maya's school called. She was in the nurse's office, crying after some kids had teased her about her criminal father. His supervisor left an awkward voicemail about taking some time off until things settle. In his small apartment, Eli methodically packed his cleaning supplies into a cardboard box. The walls felt like they were closing in. Photos of Maya's hospital visits covered his refrigerator, a reminder of why he couldn't afford to lose this job. A knock at the door made him freeze. Through the peephole, he saw Rebecca Lawson, looking decidedly un CEO, like in casual clothes. Her hair pulled back simply. Eli opened the door slowly. "Miss Lawson? Please." She stepped inside, her eyes taking in the modest apartment. "Call me Rebecca." The living room told the story of their lives. Medical bills stacked on the coffee table, Maya's artwork covering the walls, a worn Bible on the side table. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner, though it was only November. "Maya likes to put it up early," Eli explained, following her gaze. "Says it makes the treatments easier." Rebecca's face softened. "I came to apologize. I never meant for any of this to happen." "It's not your fault," Eli said, gesturing to his packed box. "But I think it's best if I resign. Maya's already having a hard enough time at school," and a harsh coughing sound interrupted him. They both turned to see Maya in the hallway, her small frame racked with coughs that seemed too big for her body. "Baby, where's your inhaler?" Eli rushed to her, panic edging his voice. Maya pointed to her room between coughs. Eli disappeared and returned with the inhaler, helping her take 2 puffs. Rebecca watched as he cradled his daughter, whispering gentle encouragements until her breathing steadied. "Sorry, Aunt Becca. Maya managed weakly. I didn't mean to scare you." Rebecca blinked at the unexpected nickname, her throat tight. "You don't need to apologize, sweetheart." Eli carried Maya to the couch, tucking a worn blanket around her. His hands were still shaking slightly. "How often does this happen?" Rebecca asked softly. "More lately," Eli admitted. "The specialist wants to try a new treatment." But he glanced at the stack of bills. Rebecca straightened. Decision made. "Let me help." "Ms. Lawson." "Rebecca," she corrected again, more firmly this time. "And I'm not asking. Maya needs treatment, and I have the means to help. Consider it repayment for what David did for you both." "I can't accept." "Yes, you can," she interrupted, her voice gentle, but leaving no room for argument. "David saved your lives that day. Let me honor his memory by helping you now." Maya's small voice piped up from the couch. "Please, Daddy, I don't want you to be scared anymore." Eli looked at his daughter, then back at Rebecca. The weight of years of struggling alone showed in his eyes. Finally, he nodded, just once. "Thank you," he whispered, the words carrying the gravity of a man who rarely asked for help. Rebecca reached for her phone. "I'll make some calls right now. We'll get her into the best treatment program in Austin." Maya's face lit up with a tired smile. "See, Daddy? I told you angels sometimes wear business suits." The pristine walls of Austin Memorial Hospital's pediatric wing stretched endlessly before Rebecca as she walked beside Dr. Sarah Chin, chief of pediatrics. Her heels clicked against the polished floor while they discussed Maya's case. "The treatment plan we're proposing is comprehensive," Dr. Chin explained, gesturing to the tablet in her hands. "Regular respiratory therapy, preventive medications, and careful monitoring. With proper care, Maya's condition should improve significantly." Rebecca nodded, her mind already racing through logistics. "Whatever she needs, spare no expense." In the waiting room, Eli sat hunched forward, his work uniform replaced by a worn plaid shirt and faded jeans. His large hands were clasped tightly together, prayer beads wrapped around his fingers. When Rebecca approached, he stood quickly, uncertainty written across his features. "Mr. Turner? Doctor?" Chin began warmly. "We've reviewed Maya's case, and we're ready to begin treatment immediately." Eli's face paled. "I appreciate everything, but I can't accept." "You can, and you will." Rebecca interrupted gently. "Please, Eli, let us help Maya." His eyes met hers, and she saw the same haunting, familiar kindness that had first caught her attention. After a long moment, he whispered, "Thank you." Over the next few weeks, Maya's hospital room transformed from sterile white to a rainbow of children's drawings and get well cards. Rebecca found herself visiting almost daily, usually during lunch breaks or after board meetings. She'd bring books, old favorites that David had once read to children during his missionary work. One afternoon, she arrived to find Maya propped up in bed, her dark curls framing a face that looked stronger than it had in days. "Aunt Becca," the little girl called out, her smile brightening the room. The nickname had stuck after their third visit, and Rebecca found she didn't mind at all. "I brought something special today," Rebecca said, pulling out a worn copy of The Little Prince. This was one of David's favorites. "The man who saved Daddy?" Maya asked, scooting over to make room. Rebecca settled beside her on the bed. "Yes, sweetheart, he used to read this to children, just like you." As Rebecca read, Eli watched from his usual chair by the window, his eyes soft with gratitude. When she finished the chapter, she closed the book and turned to him. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something." He straightened, instantly alert. "We have an opening in facilities management," she said. "The position comes with full benefits, better hours, and—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "It would mean you could spend more time with Maya." Eli's expression flickered between hope and hesitation. "Miss Lawson." "Rebecca," she corrected gently. "Rebecca," he amended. "You've already done so much, the medical care alone." "This isn't charity," she interrupted. "You're qualified. More than qualified, actually. I've seen your previous work experience before," she trailed off, not wanting to mention his wrongful conviction. Before everything fell apart, he finished quietly. Maya reached for her father's hand. "Daddy, you could read to me at bedtime again." Eli's resistance crumbled at his daughter's words. "When would you need me to start?" "Monday?" Rebecca suggested, trying to keep her voice professional despite the warmth spreading through her chest. He nodded slowly. "Thank you for everything." Their days fell into a new rhythm. Rebecca would often find excuses to visit the facilities department, where Eli had quickly earned the respect of his team. They'd share coffee in the break room, talking about faith, loss, and healing. She told him about David's dreams of building schools in developing countries. He shared stories of Maya's mother, who died shortly after childbirth. "Sometimes I wonder if God has a plan in all this," Eli admitted one afternoon, "how darkness can lead to light." Rebecca touched the empty space on her wrist where her bracelet had once been. "I stopped believing in plans when David died, but lately," she met his eyes. "I'm not so sure anymore." As Maya grew stronger, her hospital room became a sanctuary of sorts. Rebecca would arrive after particularly difficult board meetings, finding peace in the little girl's innocent wisdom and her father's steady faith. One evening, Rebecca returned to the hospital to drop off some paperwork, insurance forms that needed Eli's signature. The hallway was quiet, visiting hours nearly over. As she approached Maya's room, she heard Eli's low voice speaking softly. "Dear Lord." He was praying, kneeling beside Maya's bed where she slept peacefully. "Thank you for your mercy. Thank you for Maya's healing. And thank you for sending her." Rebecca stood frozen in the doorway, her heart thundering in her chest. The stack of papers trembled slightly in her hands as she watched this man, this gentle soul who had suffered so much, thank God for bringing her into their lives. She backed away silently, the forms forgotten. Something profound had shifted in her heart, something she wasn't quite ready to name. As she walked to her car in the gathering dusk, she failed to notice the black sedan parked across the street, or the camera lens that glinted briefly in the fading light. The small plane shuddered and dipped through thick gray clouds as it began its descent toward Honduras. Rebecca sat rigid in her first-class seat, her manicured fingers clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. Every bump and jostle sent her heart racing. though she wasn't sure if it was the turbulence or the weight of what awaited them below that made her stomach churn. Across the narrow aisle, Eli Turner pressed his face against the small oval window, watching the endless canopy of green jungle unfold beneath them. His usual calm demeanor was cracked with nervous energy. The way his foot tapped against the floor, how he kept adjusting his worn baseball cap, the distant look in his eyes that suggested he was somewhere else entirely. "Maya's okay?" Rebecca asked suddenly, her voice cutting through the drone of the engines. She needed something solid to hold on to, some reassurance that they'd made the right choice in leaving his daughter behind. Eli pulled his phone from his pocket, squinting at the small screen. A gentle smile softened the worry lines around his eyes. "Mrs. Palmer just texted 15 minutes ago. They're in the middle of baking chocolate chip cookies, and Maya's insisting they make enough for the whole neighborhood." He chuckled softly. "The doctors say she's responding real well to the new treatment. Her oxygen levels are the best they've been in months." Rebecca nodded, a wave of relief washing over her. She'd personally arranged for Maya to receive care at Austin's most prestigious children's hospital, calling in favors and pulling strings she didn't even know she had. But leaving the little girl behind, seeing the brave way she'd hugged her father goodbye and whispered that she'd be strong while he was gone, had torn at something deep in Rebecca's chest. The plane touched down with a surprisingly gentle bump that barely jarred the passengers. The moment the cabin door opened, a wall of humid, tropical air rushed in like a physical presence. Heat pressed against their skin, thick and heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth and blooming flowers. Rebecca immediately felt her crisp business clothes clinging uncomfortably to her body. A battered yellow taxi waited on the tarmac, its paint faded and bumper held on with wire and determination. The driver, a weathered man with kind eyes and calloused hands, loaded their simple luggage with careful precision. He spoke little English, but his warm smile needed no translation. The drive stretched on for what felt like hours, winding through landscapes that changed like scenes from different movies. First came the bustling outskirts of the city, colorful buildings pressed together, vendors selling fruit from wooden carts, children darting between cars with fearless confidence. Then gradually, the concrete gave way to rolling hills dotted with small farms, where cattle grazed beneath ancient trees and women carried water jugs balanced perfectly on their heads. Rebecca watched it all through the dusty window, her heart growing heavier with each passing mile. Every turn in the road brought them closer to the place where David had spent his final days, where he'd made the choice that would cost him everything and save the man sitting quietly beside her. Eli noticed the tension radiating from her like heat from asphalt. His weathered hands twisted in his lap as he searched for the right words. "You don't have to do this," he said gently, his voice barely audible over the rumble of the taxi's engine. "I could go alone, get what we need and come back." "Yes, I do." Rebecca straightened her shoulders, squaring them like armor against the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. The board wants concrete proof, documentation, witnesses, something they can't dismiss as sentiment. And, her voice caught slightly, I need to see it for myself. I need to understand what happened to him in those final weeks, why he really left everything behind. The taxi finally turned onto a narrow dirt road that seemed to lead into the heart of the jungle itself. Dust clouds billowed behind them as they bumped and jolted over ruts and rocks. Then, as if emerging from a dream, a small village appeared, a cluster of modest homes with corrugated metal roofs and walls painted in cheerful blues and yellows and greens. Children kicked a well-worn soccer ball in the main street, their laughter echoing off the buildings. Women hung bright laundry on lines strung between houses, calling to each other in rapid Spanish. Old men sat in plastic chairs outside a tiny store, playing dominoes in the shade. Time seemed to move at a different pace here, measured not in minutes and meetings, but in the rhythm of daily life, simple and unhurried. An older man in simple cotton clothes approached them as they climbed out of the taxi, his weathered face breaking into a smile that seemed to light up his entire being. Deep lines around his eyes spoke of decades spent laughing and crying with his community, and his hands bore the calluses of honest work. "I am Pastor Emilio Vargas," he said in careful, accented English, each word chosen with precision. "We received your message 3 days ago. We have waited many, many years for David's family to come home to us." Rebecca's carefully maintained composure cracked like ice in spring at hearing David's name spoken so naturally, so familiarly, as if he'd just stepped out for a moment and might return any second. The pastor led them down a narrow path lined with flowering bushes toward a small church. Its white paint was peeling from years of tropical sun and rain, but the hand-carved wooden doors were polished to a warm glow, and fresh flowers had been placed in clay pots on either side of the entrance. Inside Pastor Emilio's modest office, bookshelves lined the walls, filled with well-worn volumes in both Spanish and English. A simple wooden cross hung behind his desk, and photographs of weddings, baptisms, and community celebrations covered every available surface. The pastor moved with quiet reverence to an old filing cabinet and pulled out a worn leather folder, its edges soft with age. "David left these with me the day before the great flood came," he said softly, holding the folder like something precious. He was very specific. He said that someday, someone who loved him might come looking for answers. He wanted to be sure they would find the truth. Rebecca's hands trembled as she accepted the folder, its weight somehow far greater than the few papers it contained. Inside were letters written in David's neat, familiar handwriting, photographs she'd never seen, and a small spiral notebook with pages covered in numbers and calculations. He was deeply troubled in those final weeks. Pastor Emilio continued, settling into his chair with the careful movements of someone whose joints had seen many years of service. Something weighed very heavily on his conscience, something from his life before he came to us. He spent many hours in prayer, asking God to show him the right path forward. Rebecca and Eli exchanged glances heavy with meaning. David had left his well-paying engineering job suddenly, giving Rebecca only vague explanations about needing to find a different path, about wanting to serve people instead of profit margins. She'd thought it was just a midlife crisis, a temporary, idealistic phase he'd outgrow. He spoke often of numbers that didn't add up. The pastor continued, his voice gentle but serious, of money that disappeared into accounts that shouldn't exist. But more than the wrongdoing itself, he spoke of his own part in staying silent, of feeling complicit through his inaction. He said he couldn't truly serve God while carrying such a burden. They spent the rest of the afternoon going through the documents page by page. David's letters revealed the depth of his moral struggle, detailed hints of corporate fraud that had been systematically buried, evidence of funds diverted from charity accounts, and the growing weight of his knowledge that innocent people were being hurt by his former company's deception. His final letter, dated just 3 days before the flood, expressed both profound relief at finding his true calling in missionary work and unwavering determination to expose the truth he'd left behind in the corporate world. Pastor Emilio led them through the village as the sun began to sink lower in the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. He pointed out the small clinic that David had helped design and build, its solar panels gleaming on the roof. Elderly villagers approached them throughout their walk, each eager to share their own stories of El Americano Bueno, the good American who had worked from dawn to dusk helping their community, who had learned enough Spanish to joke with the children and pray with the grieving. "And here," the pastor said finally, stopping at the edge of a swift-moving river that sparkled in the fading light, "this is where it happened on that terrible day. The rains had been falling for 3 days straight, harder than anyone could remember. The river rose so fast that families barely had time to grab their children before the water swept through their homes." He gestured toward Eli with a mixture of reverence and sorrow. "David had just pulled the young father and his newborn baby from the rushing water when I saw him give you his bracelet. He looked you in the eyes and said to live a good life, to make it count. Then, without hesitation, he turned and went back into that angry river to help others who were still trapped." Rebecca stood at the river's edge, trying to imagine that terrible day 12 years ago. The water looked deceptively peaceful now, but she could see how quickly it could turn deadly when swollen with storm runoff. Eli stood quietly beside her, lost in memories that had shaped every day of his life since. As evening settled over the village, Pastor Emilio had one final item to share. Back in his office, he moved to a locked drawer behind his desk and pulled out a photograph preserved in a clear plastic sleeve. Rebecca gasped softly, her hand flying to her throat. The photo showed David, soaking wet but wearing the gentle smile she remembered so well, cradling a tiny bundle in his arms, a newborn baby wrapped in a soggy blanket. Next to him stood a much younger Eli, his face dazed with shock and exhaustion but alive. So beautifully alive. The date stamp in the corner showed it had been taken just hours before the flood reached its devastating peak. "He asked me to take this picture with his camera," Pastor Emilio explained, his voice thick with emotion. Even in the midst of such chaos and danger, he said that every new life was worth celebrating, that hope must always be recorded and remembered. Rebecca held the photograph with infinite care, studying David's face. The same kind eyes that had seen her through countless difficult days. the same gentle smile that had made her believe in goodness and second chances. Here was the concrete proof they'd traveled so far to find. But it was so much more than evidence for a boardroom. It was a moment frozen in time, when Grace had bound their lives together in ways none of them could have imagined. When one man's final act of courage had set in motion a chain of love that would span decades. "He saved you for a reason," she whispered, looking at Eli with new understanding flooding her heart. Eli nodded slowly, tears gathering in his eyes like morning dew. He'd carried the weight of that truth for 12 long years, living each day trying to be worthy of the second chance he'd been given, raising his daughter with the values of the man who died so they could live. The circle was finally, beautifully complete. The Austin skyline glowed golden in the late afternoon sun as Rebecca's car pulled up to Lawson Technologies headquarters. She clutched her leather portfolio close, filled with the precious evidence from Honduras. David's letters, photographs, and sworn statements from the villagers. Her heart felt lighter than it had in years. Inside her office, Rebecca spread the documents across her glass desk. Her fingers traced David's handwriting, remembering how he used to dot his I's with tiny circles. A smile tugged at her lips as she remembered his playful spirit, so different from the corporate world she now inhabited. "Miss Lawson?" Her assistant Sarah poked her head in. "The press is gathering in the conference room." Rebecca nodded, gathering the materials. "Is Eli here?" "He's waiting downstairs with Maya. She insisted on coming." The elevator ride down gave Rebecca a moment to center herself. The old Rebecca would have rehearsed her talking points, worried about stock prices and public perception. But something had shifted in Honduras. Standing in that humble village church, hearing stories of David's sacrifice, she'd felt her old faith stirring, like a flower pushing through concrete. The conference room buzzed with activity. Cameras flashed as Rebecca entered, but her eyes found Maya first. The girl sat in a wheelchair near the front, her color better than it had been in weeks. The new treatments were working. Eli stood behind her, one hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "Good afternoon," Rebecca began, her voice steady. 2 weeks ago, I traveled to Honduras with Eli Turner to investigate a remarkable story of courage and connection. Today, I'm sharing what we found. She projected the photos on the screen behind her, the village, the church, the weathered faces of those who remembered. David's letters appeared next, his words about faith and purpose enlarged, for all to see. David Lawson didn't just save 2 lives that day. Rebecca continued, he left us a legacy of compassion that challenges us to be better, to look deeper, to care more. The reporters leaned forward, hands raised with questions. But Rebecca wasn't finished. In honor of David's sacrifice, Lawson Technologies is establishing a permanent medical fund for children in need, starting with full coverage for all pediatric respiratory cases like Maya's. Applause erupted. Maya beamed, while Eli blinked rapidly, fighting tears. After the announcement, reporters swarmed Eli, hungry for sound bites about his incredible journey. But he simply shook his head, guiding Maya's wheelchair toward the exit. "The story isn't about me," he said quietly. "It's about a man who gave everything for strangers. That's all that matters." Rebecca watched them go, noting how Eli's humility only made the press more intrigued. She'd seen enough corporate manipulation to recognize genuine grace when she saw it. Later that afternoon, she visited Maya at the hospital for her treatment. The girl's room had transformed over the weeks, filled with drawings and cards from well-wishers. Maya sat up in bed, coloring with new energy. "Aunt Becca," she called out, using the nickname that never failed to warm Rebecca's heart. "Look what I made." The drawing showed 3 figures holding hands, a tall man, a little girl, and a woman in business clothes. Above them, a 4th figure with wings watched from the clouds. "That's Daddy's angel friend," Maya explained, pointing to the winged figure. "And that's you, and me, and Daddy." Rebecca's throat tightened. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Eli entered with Maya's medication. "The doctors say she might be strong enough for outpatient treatment soon," he said softly. Their eyes met briefly, and Rebecca felt that familiar flutter. Not romance, exactly, but something deeper. Trust, perhaps, or recognition of how grace could work through broken pieces to create something new. "The press coverage has been overwhelming positive," Rebecca said. "People are calling it a modern miracle. I just hope it helps other families get the care they need," Eli replied, adjusting Maya's blanket with gentle hands. Rebecca watched him, understanding now why David had given him the bracelet. Both men shared that quiet strength, that instinct to deflect praise toward others. After saying goodbye to Maya, Rebecca headed to her car in the hospital parking garage. Her phone buzzed with an anonymous text. Her blood ran cold as she read the message. "Stop digging, or we'll expose the truth about him." Rebecca paced in her dimly lit office, the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her fingers trembled as she held her phone, showing the anonymous message to Eli. He stood quietly, his usually warm eyes now clouded with worry. "Stop digging, or we'll expose the truth about him." The words glowed harsh and threatening on the screen. "There's something I need to tell you," Eli said softly, sinking into one of the leather chairs across from Rebecca's desk. His shoulders slumped, carrying an invisible weight. "That conviction from my past? It wasn't just a simple fraud case." Rebecca settled into her chair, leaning forward. "I'm listening, Eli." He rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit she'd noticed before. "I was working as a mechanic for Safecore Industries. They supplied critical safety equipment to major tech companies." His voice grew quieter. "I discovered they were using substandard materials, cutting corners to save money. When I tried to report it, they framed me for cooking the books." Rebecca's breath caught. Safecore Industries. The name tugged at her memory. She turned to her computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Safecore was one of our major suppliers 10 years ago. They knew I had proof," Eli continued. "But before I could fight back, they planted evidence in my apartment, made it look like I was part of a scheme to inflate maintenance costs." His eyes met Rebecca's. "I lost everything. My job, my reputation, my savings. If it wasn't for David finding me in Honduras after I fled." Rebecca pulled up old company files, scanning through years of financial records. "This goes deeper than we thought. Look at these payment records to Safecore." She turned the screen so Eli could see. The amounts don't match our standard supplier contracts. They spent the next hour digging through digital archives. Rebecca ordered dinner. Neither wanted to leave until they found answers. Paper cups of coffee multiplied on her desk as they searched through court documents from Eli's case. "Here," Rebecca said suddenly, pointing to a paragraph in the court transcript. "The prosecution's key witness was a Safecore executive who testified that you orchestrated the whole thing." She scrolled down, her face growing pale. "But the document is heavily redacted. Most names are blacked out." Eli leaned closer, squinting at the screen. "That testimony was full of lies, but I never even got to face my accuser in court. My public defender told me taking a plea deal was my only option." Rebecca opened another folder, this one containing old board meeting minutes from the Safecore era. There has to be a connection, someone who knew about both companies. Her voice trailed off as she spotted something. "What is it?" Eli asked, noting her sudden stillness. Her hands shook slightly as she opened a series of documents side by side. "Look at these signatures. This one from Safecore's executive board." She pulled up another document, "And this one from our current board." Eli's eyes widened as he saw what she was pointing to. The same elegant, distinctive signature appeared on both documents. "Arthur Dean," Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible. "He was my father's closest friend. He helped build this company." She sat back, stunned. "According to these records, he was also on Safecore's board when you were framed." "The man who testified against me," Eli said slowly. "I never saw his face, but I remember his voice. Smooth, confident, almost smug." Rebecca nodded, a chill running down her spine. "That's Arthur. He's been our board chair since my father died." She stood up and walked to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. "He was the one who pushed hardest against investigating your story, who questioned your character from the start. Because he knew," Eli said quietly. "He knew the truth would lead back to him." Rebecca turned back to face him, her expression hardening with determination. "We need proof, concrete evidence that links him to what happened to you." She gathered the scattered papers on her desk. "And we need to be careful. If Arthur suspects, we're on to him." "He's already suspicious," Eli pointed out, hence the threatening message. Rebecca nodded, checking her watch. It was nearly midnight. "We should stop for now. Arthur has eyes everywhere in this building." She began carefully organizing the documents into her portfolio. "I'll have my private security team sweep this office for bugs tomorrow." "What about Maya?" Eli asked, worry creeping into his voice. "If they're willing to threaten us, I'll assign protection for both of you," Rebecca assured him. "People I trust personally." She paused, looking at him intently. "I'm so sorry, Eli. My company, my father's company, was part of what happened to you. You weren't involved," he said gently, "and you're trying to make it right. That's what matters." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their discovery settling over them. Through the windows, the city stretched out below, unaware of the decade-old deception they'd just uncovered. David would have fought for the truth. Rebecca said finally, touching the silver bracelet on Eli's wrist, no matter the cost. Eli nodded, his expression solemn but determined. Then that's what we'll do. For David, for justice. Rebecca gathered her things, her mind already racing with next steps. They had the first piece of the puzzle, Arthur Dean's name connecting Safecore to Lawson Technologies. But she knew they'd need more than just old signatures and redacted documents to expose the truth. Whatever it took, she silently vowed, they would find it. The grand ballroom of the Austin Convention Center sparkled with elegant decorations that transformed the cavernous space into something magical. Massive crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks from the vaulted ceiling, casting pools of warm golden light across the polished marble floors. Round tables draped in crisp white linens dotted the room, each adorned with centerpieces of white roses and baby's breath that filled the air with their delicate fragrance. Hundreds of gathered guests mingled beneath the soft glow, their voices creating a gentle hum of anticipation that buzzed through the refined atmosphere. News cameras lined the back wall like a row of mechanical sentinels, their red recording lights blinking steadily. Reporters adjusted their earpieces and checked their notes, while photographers tested their flash settings. The media presence was substantial. Local news stations, business journals, and even a crew from a national network that had been following Rebecca's story since the initial discovery of the bracelet. A large banner stretched across the elevated stage, its elegant script reading, "The David Lawson Foundation for Second Chances," in deep navy letters against crisp white fabric. Smaller banners flanked it, displaying photos of children from Honduras alongside images of local families in need. The stage itself gleamed under professional lighting that had been carefully positioned to create the perfect backdrop for what everyone knew would be a pivotal moment. Rebecca stood confidently at the polished wooden podium, her navy dress a perfect complement to the foundation's colors. The fabric caught the stage lights beautifully, and her auburn hair was swept back in an elegant updo that framed her face. Her posture spoke of years spent commanding boardrooms. Yet something softer had emerged in her demeanor, a warmth that hadn't been there in her earlier corporate presentations. Her voice carried clear and strong through the advanced sound system, reaching every corner of the packed ballroom. 12 years ago, I lost someone very special to me, she began, her words measured and heartfelt. David Lawson was my fiancé, my best friend, and a man whose compassion knew no boundaries. When he died in that flood in Honduras, I thought his light had gone out forever. She paused, her eyes scanning the attentive faces before her. But today, standing here with all of you, I realized something profound. David's spirit never truly left us. His final act of extraordinary courage saved 2 precious lives, and through them, his legacy of compassion and sacrifice lives on, stronger than ever. In the front row, 7-year-old Maya sat perched on the edge of her cushioned chair, looking like a small princess in her pretty yellow dress. The fabric was soft cotton, with tiny white flowers embroidered along the hem, and her dark curls had been carefully arranged with matching yellow ribbons that caught the light when she moved her head. She looked remarkably healthier now than she had just months before. Her cheeks were rosy and full instead of pale and hollow, her breathing steady and unlabored. The medical treatments Rebecca had arranged were clearly working miracles. Next to Maya, Eli sat with quiet dignity in a new charcoal suit that Rebecca had insisted on having professionally tailored for this special occasion. The fine wool fabric fit him perfectly, transforming his usual humble appearance into something distinguished yet still unmistakably authentic. His hands were folded carefully in his lap, his shoulders straight with the posture of a man who had learned to carry himself with quiet pride. Yet tension was visible in the slight tightness around his eyes and the firm set of his jaw. The cameras and attention still made him uncomfortable, though he bore it with grace for Maya's sake. The David Lawson Foundation, Rebecca continued, her voice growing stronger with conviction, will provide comprehensive medical care and educational support to children in desperate need, both here in Austin and in the remote villages of Honduras where David gave his life. Because every single child, regardless of their circumstances, deserves a second chance at life, at pursuing their dreams, at discovering hope even in the darkest moments. Her eyes found Eli's across the crowd, and she offered him an encouraging smile that spoke of deep friendship and mutual respect. The audience responded with warm, sustained applause that rippled through the ballroom like waves. Camera flashes sparkled continuously through the elegant space, creating brief moments of brilliant light that danced across the crystal chandeliers and white linens. The sound was genuinely enthusiastic, not the polite corporate clapping Rebecca had grown accustomed to in business settings. Among the crowd, board members sat in carefully arranged clusters, their expensive designer suits and practiced neutral expressions, marking them as the corporate elite they were. Some leaned forward with apparent interest, while others maintained the cautious distance of those protecting their own interests. Arthur Dean occupied a prime seat near the front, distinguished and imposing in his tailored Italian suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, his posture erect, and his face wore the practiced smile of a seasoned politician. But behind that carefully constructed facade, his pale blue eyes watched everything with cold calculation, measuring each word and gesture for potential threats to his carefully guarded secrets. And now, Rebecca announced, her voice carrying a note of genuine affection as she gestured toward the front row. "I'd like to invite someone very special to share his story with all of you. Please welcome Eli Turner." Eli rose slowly from his chair, his movements deliberate and thoughtful. He straightened his tie with nervous fingers, the simple gesture betraying the anxiety he felt despite his outward composure. Maya immediately reached up and squeezed his hand with both of her small ones, her face glowing with pride and love. "You can do it, Daddy," she whispered in a voice barely audible above the ambient noise. But her words carried all the faith in the world. He bent down carefully and kissed her forehead, inhaling the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo, drawing strength from her unwavering belief in him. The walk to the stage felt longer than it actually was, each step carrying the weight of his past struggles and current hopes. As Eli approached the podium, the crowd's conversations gradually faded to an expectant hush. The microphone had been adjusted to his height, and the stage lights, while bright, were positioned to avoid creating harsh shadows on his face. At the podium, Eli cleared his throat softly and gripped the polished wood edges with both hands. His voice started barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly through the excellent sound system. 12 years ago, I was a broken man with a newborn daughter, caught in a flood that should have ended both our lives. As he spoke, his voice grew stronger and more confident, the truth of his story lending power to his words. But God, in his infinite mercy, sent an angel named David Lawson, a man who gave his own life so that Maya and I could live. The massive ballroom fell completely silent, as if everyone had collectively held their breath. Even the photographers, typically focused on capturing the perfect shot, lowered their cameras slightly to listen more intently. The weight of Eli's words seemed to settle over the room like a gentle blanket of reverence. For years after that terrible night, I carried crushing guilt for surviving when such a good man didn't. Eli continued, his honesty raw and unfiltered. I wore his bracelet every single day to remember the incredible price that was paid for my daughter's life. His fingers moved unconsciously to touch the silver bracelet on his wrist, the metal worn smooth from years of nervous touching. But meeting Rebecca showed me something I had never understood before, that grace doesn't end with just one act of kindness. True grace ripples outward like stones thrown into still water, touching life after life, generation after generation. In the audience, several people openly wiped away tears with tissues or the backs of their hands. Business executives who prided themselves on emotional control found themselves unexpectedly moved. News anchors, trained to maintain professional objectivity, leaned forward in their seats with genuine interest, recognizing instinctively that they were witnessing something rare and powerful, a moment of authentic human connection in a world often dominated by calculated public relations. David's ultimate sacrifice gave my precious daughter the gift of life itself. Eli's voice cracked slightly with emotion, but he pressed on with determination. Rebecca's incredible kindness and generosity gave us something we thought we'd lost forever, hope for the future. And now this foundation will pass that same transformative gift forward to countless others who need it most desperately. He paused, looking out over the sea of faces, seeing his own story reflected in their expressions. That's what real grace looks like, not just receiving second chances when we don't deserve them, but finding the courage and compassion to give those same chances to others. The applause began as a few scattered claps, then built steadily like approaching thunder until it became a thunderous standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Maya bounced excitedly in her seat, clapping her small hands together with unbridled joy and pride. Tears streamed down Rebecca's face as she dabbed at her eyes with a delicate lace handkerchief, no longer caring about maintaining her perfectly applied makeup. As Eli returned to his seat with quiet dignity, Rebecca took the podium again, her composure regained but her eyes still bright with unshed tears. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm deeply honored to announce our foundation's first major initiative, the Turner Scholarship Program. Her voice rang with conviction and purpose. This program will provide comprehensive medical care and complete educational support for the children of single working parents who are struggling to make ends meet while fighting for their families' futures. The ramble, applause that followed was even more enthusiastic than before. If such a thing were possible, Maya suddenly jumped up from her chair and ran toward the stage, her yellow dress flowing behind her like sunshine. Without hesitation, she wrapped her small arms around Rebecca's legs in an impromptu hug that drew delighted laughter and affectionate murmurs from the entire crowd. The spontaneous gesture was so pure and genuine that even the most jaded reporters found themselves smiling. Rebecca immediately knelt down to Maya's level and embraced her properly, holding the little girl close as cameras flashed rapidly all around them. The image would later become iconic. The powerful CEO and the child whose father's story had changed everything, united in a moment of perfect love and hope. With theatrical precision, multicolored confetti began raining down from hidden dispensers in the ceiling, creating a magical cascade of paper butterflies, stars, and hearts in every color imaginable. The effect was breathtaking, transforming the already elegant ballroom into something that looked like a fairy tale come to life. Rebecca officially declared the foundation launched as the colorful paper swirled around them like gentle snow. The audience rose as one in enthusiastic celebration, and reporters immediately began calling out questions over the joyful noise. Maya released Rebecca and began twirling in the falling confetti, her yellow dress spinning around her like a flower dancing in sunshine. She laughed with pure delight as she tried to catch the colorful pieces, her happiness infectious and absolute. Eli remained standing quietly near the stage, watching his daughter with an expression of profound joy and gratitude written across his weathered features. His gentle smile spoke of a man who had learned to recognize miracles when they appeared in his life, no matter how they were disguised. The transformation in both his circumstances and his heart was visible to anyone who looked closely enough to see. Rebecca walked over and gently squeezed his arm, her touch warm and reassuring. "Thank you," she whispered close to his ear so only he could hear. "Thank you for everything, for your courage, for sharing your story, for letting me be part of this beautiful journey." In his carefully positioned front row seat, Arthur Dean maintained his practiced applause while his pale eyes hardened like chips of winter ice. He watched with growing alarm as Rebecca knelt down to hug Maya again, observed the genuine warmth and affection that flowed so naturally between them. His manicured fingers gripped the leather armrest of his chair, slightly tighter than necessary, though his public smile never wavered even for an instant. Behind that polished facade, his mind was already calculating the potential threats this emotional display might pose to his carefully constructed world of secrets and lies. The celebration continued to swirl around them with infectious energy. Board members networking strategically with wealthy donors, reporters gathering compelling quotes for their stories, and supporters congratulating Rebecca on what everyone agreed was a triumph of both heart and purpose. Maya continued collecting handfuls of confetti like precious treasure, showing her colorful bounty to anyone who would pause long enough to admire it with appropriate enthusiasm. Through it all, Eli stood exactly as he always had. Humble yet dignified, grateful beyond measure, and quietly strong in his unshakable faith that grace would continue finding its way forward into the world, one transformed life at a time. The foundation's launch was just the beginning of something much larger than any of them could fully comprehend. In that golden moment of celebration and hope, the morning sun hadn't yet burned through Austin's morning fog when Rebecca's phone buzzed with urgent notifications. Her coffee cup froze halfway to her lips as she read the breaking news headline: Foundation launch marred by scandal. Lawson Technologies' new hero linked to million-dollar fraud. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the article. Someone had leaked old financial records suggesting Eli had received payments from Safety First Solutions, the supplier at the center of his past conviction. The story painted him as a willing participant in the fraud, not its victim. "This is impossible," she whispered to her empty kitchen. Her phone rang. Michael, head of security, spoke in clipped tones. "Miss Lawson, the board is convening an emergency meeting in 30 minutes, and," he hesitated, "We've detained Mr. Turner when he arrived for work." Rebecca's voice turned sharp. "What do you mean, detained?" "Standard protocol for potential security risks, ma'am. He's in the holding room on the ground floor." "And his daughter?" "Security escorted her home to her neighbor's care." Rebecca grabbed her keys, already moving. "I'm on my way. And Michael, make sure Eli's treated with respect." The drive to headquarters felt endless. News vans crowded the parking lot, reporters clutching coffee cups in the early morning chill. Rebecca used her private entrance, avoiding their shouted questions. Inside, the security desk was chaos. Phones rang constantly. Guards spoke in hushed, urgent tones. Through the glass partition of the holding room, Rebecca caught a glimpse of Eli sitting alone, still wearing his work uniform. His shoulders slumped, but his head held high. Her heart ached to go to him, but Annie from legal intercepted her. "Board's waiting, Miss Lawson. It's urgent." The elevator ride to the top floor was silent and tense. Rebecca used those moments to steel herself, squaring her shoulders and lifting her chin. She was still CEO. She would not be intimidated. The boardroom doors opened to reveal the full board already assembled. 12 faces turned to her, some concerned, others coldly professional. At the head of the table sat Arthur Dean, his silver hair immaculate, his expression grave but with the faintest hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Rebecca," he gestured to her usual seat. "Please join us. We have much to discuss." She remained standing. "Why is Eli Turner being detained like a criminal?" Arthur's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Given the serious nature of these allegations you arranged to have leaked?" Rebecca cut in. A ripple of murmurs went through the board members. Arthur raised his hands for silence. "These are documented financial transactions, Rebecca. Mr. Turner received substantial payments from Safety First Solutions while employed there, payments he concealed during his trial. That's impossible. He was a mechanic, not an accountant." "The records suggest otherwise." Arthur nodded to his assistant, who distributed folders to everyone present. "Multiple deposits to an offshore account. Clever routing to avoid detection. Our compliance team verified everything this morning." Rebecca flipped through the documents, her mind racing. The numbers looked convincing, but something felt wrong. These could easily be fabricated. By whom? Arthur's voice dripped concern. "Rebecca, I know you've grown, attached to this situation, to him, but we have a responsibility to our shareholders. Our responsibility is to the truth," she snapped. One of the younger board members cleared his throat. "Miss Lawson, the optics are devastating. Social media is already calling for boycotts. Our stock dropped 12 points in pre-market trading." "So we're just going to throw an innocent man to the wolves? Again?" Arthur stood slowly, his height imposing. "We're suspending Mr. Turner pending a full investigation. And?" He paused meaningfully. "The board suggests you take a brief leave of absence." "Excuse me?" "Your judgment appears compromised. This entire foundation launch, while well-intentioned, has exposed us to significant liability. We need to protect the company." Rebecca looked around the table, seeking allies. She found few willing to meet her eyes. These were people she'd worked with for years, people who'd supported her vision for the company. Now they sat in silence, choosing safety over justice. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "No, Rebecca." Arthur moved closer, lowering his voice. "You made the mistake. Sometimes sentiment blinds smart people. Don't let your emotions over David cloud your judgment now." The mention of David's name from Arthur's lips sent anger coursing through her. She stepped right up to him, her voice steel. "I will prove Eli's innocence, whatever it costs, whatever it takes." "Be careful," Arthur warned softly. "You have much to lose. So do you." She turned on her heel and walked out, leaving stunned silence behind her. In the hallway, her hands shook as she pressed the elevator button. The numbers counted down slowly, each chime marking another moment. Eli sat alone in that holding room. Another moment Maya waited, anxiously at home. Another moment justice was delayed. The elevator arrived with a soft ding. As Rebecca stepped inside, she caught her reflection in the mirrored walls. Her face was pale but determined. She thought of David's bracelet, of his sacrifice, of the grace that had brought Eli into her life. Whatever it takes, she whispered to herself as the doors closed. The holding cell felt cold and sterile, its blank walls a stark contrast to the warmth of yesterday's celebration. Eli sat on the thin mattress, his janitor's uniform replaced with standard-issue clothes that reminded him too much of his previous wrongful imprisonment. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, creating shadows that danced across the concrete floor. He closed his eyes, folded his hands, and bowed his head. "Lord," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the empty cell, "watch over my Maya. Keep her safe. Give Rebecca the wisdom she needs." His silver bracelet, David's bracelet, had been taken with his personal effects, leaving a pale strip of skin on his wrist that he couldn't stop looking at. Across town, Rebecca sat in her home office, surrounded by stacks of papers and multiple computer screens. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. Michael Grant stood beside her, his military precision evident in how methodically he worked through digital archives. "Arthur's careful," Michael muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "But everyone makes mistakes. Even when deleting files, they leave traces." Rebecca rubbed her temples. "We need those original safety-first documents, the real ones, not the doctored versions from the trial." She picked up her phone for the 100th time, checking messages from Mrs. Palmer about Maya. The latest text made her heart sink. "Maya's fever's back. Breathing's rough again. Doctor says hospital might be needed." "Ma'am," Michael's voice cut through her worry. "Look at this." He pointed to his screen. Server logs from 12 years ago. Large file deletions the night before the safety-first investigation began, all authorized by Arthur Dean's credentials. Rebecca leaned forward, hope flickering in her tired eyes. "Can you recover them?" "Maybe." Michael's jaw tightened. "But we'll need help. This kind of deep recovery, it's beyond my usual tools." In Mrs. Palmer's modest home, Maya lay on the couch. Her breathing labored. The elderly woman pressed a cool cloth to the child's forehead, humming hymns softly. "Your daddy's going to be home soon, sweet girl," she whispered, though worry creased her kind face. Maya's eyes fluttered open. "I saw him on TV," she said weakly. "People were saying mean things, but daddy's good. He fixes things." Mrs. Palmer blinked back tears. "That he does, child, that he does." Back at her office, Rebecca paced while specialized data recovery experts worked on Michael's findings. Her phone rang, Arthur Dean's name flashing on the screen. She declined the call, her determination hardening. Instead, she dialed her personal lawyer. "Whatever it costs," she said firmly, "whatever it takes. I need to see him." Hours later, Rebecca walked down the cold corridor of the holding facility. A guard unlocked a heavy door, revealing Eli sitting on his bed, head bowed in prayer. He looked up, surprise and gratitude washing over his tired face. "Rebecca," he said softly, standing, "you shouldn't be here. They'll use this against you." She shook her head, stepping closer to the cell bars. "Let them try. Michael found something, Eli. Server logs from the night before your arrest. Arthur deleted files. Lots of them." Eli's expression remained gentle, even in his distress. "How's Maya?" Rebecca's heart ached at the question, always thinking of others. Even now, Mrs. Palmer's with her. She's having a rough day, but she's getting good care. She didn't mention the fever, not wanting to add to his burden. She needs her treatments. "Eli said, his voice catching, "The new ones were working so well." "I've arranged everything," Rebecca assured him. "The hospital has strict instructions. Your insurance won't be affected by any of this." Eli pressed his forehead against the cool metal bars. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "All you've done for us, and now this scandal." "Don't." Rebecca's voice was firm. "This isn't your fault. It's Arthur's, and we're going to prove it." She glanced at her watch, knowing her time was almost up. "I'll bring you home, Eli. I promise." He nodded weakly, faith and exhaustion warring in his eyes. "Tell Maya I'll see her soon." As Rebecca turned to leave, she heard him resume his quiet prayers. Her heels clicked against the concrete floor, each step strengthening her resolve. In her car, she found another message from Mrs. Palmer. Maya's fever had spiked again. She gripped her steering wheel tightly, David's words from his recovered letters echoing in her mind. Sometimes God's greatest. Miracles look like ordinary people doing the right thing. She started her car, already planning her next move. Arthur Dean had no idea what was coming. Michael's fingers flew across the keyboard, his eyes fixed on the glowing screen in his dimly lit security office. The digital clock read 2:37 a.m., but sleep was the last thing on his mind. For weeks, he'd been secretly combing through archive servers, looking for any trace of evidence that might help Eli. A notification popped up on his screen. His specialized software had found something buried deep in the corporate backup files, emails dating back 12 years, supposedly deleted but never completely erased from the system. "Got you," he whispered, leaning forward. His eyes widened as he scrolled through the messages. There it was, undeniable proof. Emails between Arthur Dean and the executives of the supplier company, discussing how to frame an inconvenient employee who discovered their safety violations. Eli Turner's name appeared again and again. Michael's hand trembled as he reached for his phone. "Miss Lawson, I'm sorry to wake you, but you need to see this. Now." 30 minutes later, Rebecca burst through the security office door, still wearing her silk pajamas under a hastily thrown-on coat. "Show me everything," she demanded, pulling up a chair. Michael played the evidence across his screens, dozens of emails, forged documents, and financial records showing how Arthur had orchestrated Eli's downfall. "He created a perfect paper trail to make Eli look guilty," Michael explained, his voice tight with anger. "Then buried the real evidence so deep, he thought no one would ever find it." Rebecca's face hardened as she read, "Call an emergency board meeting. Right now. Ma'am, it's 3 in the morning. I don't care if it's midnight on Christmas Eve. Get 'em here." All of them. Within an hour, sleepy and irritated board members filed into the conference room. Arthur Dean arrived last, his usual polished appearance slightly rumpled from the late hour. "Rebecca, this better be important." "Oh, it is." Rebecca stood at the head of the table, her laptop connected to the room's main screen. "I know what you did to Eli Turner." Arthur's face flickered for just a moment before settling into practiced confusion. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Let me refresh your memory." Rebecca began displaying the emails, one by one. The board members leaned forward, whispers growing louder as the evidence mounted. "You framed an innocent man to cover up your own corruption. You destroyed his life, separated him from his newborn daughter, all to protect your profits." Arthur's composure cracked. "These are obviously fabricated. They're authenticated, Arthur. Timestamped. Verified by 3 separate digital forensics experts in the last hour." Rebecca's voice cut through his protests like steel. "And that's not all. There's evidence of ongoing fraud, kickbacks, safety violations, decade of corruption with your fingerprints all over it." The board erupted in chaos. Some members shouted questions, others demanded explanations. Arthur stood abruptly, his chair clattering backward. "This is absurd. I won't stand here and sit down." Michael's quiet command carried across the room as security personnel moved to block the exits. The police are already on their way. Rebecca watched her mentor's face transform from outrage to fear. "Why?" she asked softly. "My father trusted you. We all trusted you." "Your father was weak," Arthur spat, "always putting people before profits. I did what had to be done to keep this company strong." "No," Rebecca replied. "You did what was easy instead of what was right, and now you'll pay for it." The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements, press releases, and legal documents. As dawn approached, Rebecca sat in her car outside the courthouse, clutching a thick folder of evidence. Her lawyer had worked through the night to prepare an emergency petition for Eli's release. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold when the judge reviewed the evidence. Rebecca held her breath as he studied the documents, her heart pounding with each turn of a page. Finally, he looked up and nodded. "Get him out." Rebecca rushed down to the holding area, Michael at her side. They waited as guards processed the release paperwork, each minute feeling like an hour. Then, finally, a door opened. Eli emerged, squinting at the morning light streaming through the windows. He looked tired and thinner, his face showing weeks of worry, but his eyes still held that same gentle strength Rebecca had come to know. "It's over," she said simply. "You're free, really free this time." Eli stood there for a moment, absorbing her words. Then he took a deep breath and stepped forward, into the sunlight flooding through the courthouse doors. He closed his eyes, letting the warmth wash over his face. "Maya?" he asked quietly. "Waiting for you at home," Rebecca assured him. "Mrs. Palmer's been taking good care of her. She's doing much better." Eli nodded, emotion making it hard to speak. The morning light caught the silver bracelet still on his wrist, David's bracelet, making it shine like a beacon of hope. "Let's get you home," Rebecca said softly, touching his arm. "Your daughter's waited long enough for her father to come back." Together, they walked out into the rising sun, leaving the shadows of the past behind them. Above them, the morning sky blazed with the promise of a new day. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the worn welcome mat. As Eli stood before his apartment door, his hands trembled slightly as he turned the key, the familiar click of the lock bringing tears to his eyes. After weeks in a cold cell, even the peeling paint and squeaky hinges felt like luxury. The door swung open to reveal his small living room, bathed in golden light. There, curled up on their threadbare brown couch, lay Maya. She was fast asleep, her dark curls spilling across the cushion, her small hands clutching a wrinkled photograph of him. The sight made his heart ache with love and gratitude. Rebecca sat quietly in the old armchair by the window, a children's book open in her lap. She looked different here in his humble home, more human somehow, in simple jeans and a sweater instead of her usual corporate attire. When she saw him, she pressed a finger to her lips and smiled softly. Eli moved quietly across the room, his work boots barely making a sound on the carpet. He knelt beside the couch, drinking in the sight of his daughter's peaceful face. Maya stirred slightly, perhaps sensing his presence. "Maya, sweetheart," he whispered, gently touching her hand. "I'm home." Her eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition. For a moment, she just stared at him, as if afraid he might disappear. Then, her face crumpled with emotion. "Daddy," she cried out, launching herself into his arms. "You came back! You really came back!" Eli caught her, holding her tight against his chest as she sobbed. His own tears fell freely now, dampening her hair as he rocked her gently. "Of course I came back, baby girl. I'll always come back to you." "I was so scared," Maya hiccuped between sobs. "The kids at school said mean things, and then you were gone, and I got sick again." "Shh, it's okay now," Eli soothed, rubbing circles on her back like he'd done since she was tiny. "Everything's okay now. I'm here." Rebecca watched from her chair, wiping away her own tears. When Maya's sobs finally quieted to sniffles, she stood up, smoothing her jeans nervously. "I should probably go," she began, but Maya's head shot up. "No, Aunt Becca, stay," Maya pleaded, reaching out one hand while keeping the other firmly wrapped in her father's shirt. "Please? Daddy makes the best grilled cheese sandwiches." Eli looked up at Rebecca, his eyes full of emotion. "It's the least I can do," he said softly. "To thank you for everything, for believing in me, for never giving up." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." In the small kitchen, Maya perched on her usual stool, watching as Eli moved around the familiar space. His movements were sure and practiced as he pulled out bread, butter, and cheese. Rebecca offered to help, but he shooed her to sit with Maya instead. "This is my specialty," he said with a slight smile. "First meal, I learned to cook when it was just Maya and me." As the sandwiches sizzled in the pan, filling the kitchen with their homey aroma, Maya regaled them with stories about Mrs. Palmer's cat and the art project she'd finished at school. Her voice, bright and animated, seemed to chase away the last shadows of the past weeks. The simple meal came together quickly. Golden brown grilled cheese sandwiches cut into triangles, just the way Maya liked them, with apple slices arranged in star patterns on their plates. They gathered around the small kitchen table, where a scratch mark near Maya's place still showed where she'd practiced writing her name years ago. "This is really good," Rebecca said after her first bite, surprise evident in her voice. "Told you," Maya beamed. "Daddy makes them perfect every time." "The secret is patience," Eli explained, his eyes twinkling. "And lots of butter." Maya giggled, a sound so precious that both adults couldn't help but join in. Soon, laughter filled the small kitchen. Maya's bell-like giggles, Eli's deep chuckle, and Rebecca's elegant laugh blending together like music. It was such a simple thing, sitting there in that modest kitchen, eating grilled cheese sandwiches and laughing together. But to Eli, it felt like a miracle. After weeks of cold cells and harsh fluorescent lights, after years of struggling alone, after all the pain and doubt, here was warmth, here was family, here was hope. Rebecca watched as Eli reached over to wipe a smudge of melted cheese from Maya's chin. The gesture so natural and loving, it made her heart squeeze. Maya caught her father's hand and held it, as if still reassuring herself he was really there. "Thank you," Eli said again, meeting Rebecca's eyes across the table. In those two simple words lay volumes. Gratitude for her faith in him, for protecting Maya, for bringing light back into their lives. The morning headlines splashed across every major news outlet told a story of redemption. CEO exposes corporate conspiracy, janitor's name cleared, read the Austin Chronicle. Breaking. Arthur Dean arrested. Decade-old fraud scheme uncovered, proclaimed the Business Times. On television screens across the city, reporters stood outside Lawson Technologies' gleaming headquarters, their voices filled with excitement as they detailed the stunning developments. Inside the building's marble lobby, employees gathered in clusters, their conversations a mix of shock and admiration. The security guards, who had once watched Eli with suspicion, now nodded respectfully as he passed. Rebecca's assistant Jenny wiped tears from her eyes as she organized stacks of press releases clearing Eli's name. Rebecca stood at her office window, watching the media vans below. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since Arthur's arrest, but she felt lighter than she had in years. The truth had finally broken through the corporate facade, just as the morning sun now streamed through the glass walls. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Michael, the head of security, reminded her gently. His loyalty during the investigation had proved invaluable. Thank you, Michael. Not just for the reminder for everything. The boardroom, usually a place of tension and power plays, felt different today. The empty chair at the head of the table, Arthur's seat, seemed to represent all that was changing. Rebecca took her place, noting how the remaining board members avoided her gaze. They had all enabled Arthur's deception, whether through active participation or willing ignorance. Ladies and gentlemen, Rebecca began, her voice steady and clear. Today marks a new chapter for Lawson Technologies. The press release announcing Arthur Dean's resignation has gone out, but that's just the beginning. She placed her hands flat on the polished table, drawing strength from its solidity. I'm stepping down as CEO. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Rebecca held up her hand for silence. This company needs more than just removing corruption. It needs a complete moral renewal. We've lost sight of what my father originally built this company to be, a force for good in the community. Through the boardroom's glass walls, she could see Eli in the hallway, speaking with a group of maintenance staff. They surrounded him with supportive pats on the back and warm handshakes. The sight brought a smile to her face. I'm proposing a complete restructuring, Rebecca continued. Employee representation on the board, a new charitable foundation, profit-sharing programs, and most importantly, a corporate culture that values every person who walks through these doors, from the CEO to the night janitor. Over the next few hours, the building hummed with activity. Human resources teams organized town halls. IT departments began transparency initiatives. The marketing team worked on messaging that emphasized authenticity over image. In the cafeteria, longtime employees shared stories of the company's early days, when Rebecca's father had known everyone by name. It's like waking up from a long sleep, one veteran programmer told his younger colleagues. By afternoon, the employee response was overwhelming. Teams from every department submitted proposals for community outreach programs. The maintenance staff organized a collection for children's medical care, inspired by Maya's story. Even the most cynical executives found themselves moved by the wave of genuine enthusiasm. Rebecca spent the day moving through the building, talking with employees at every level. She stopped at each department, sharing her vision for a company built on compassion rather than competition. The walls of hierarchy seemed to crumble with each conversation. As the day drew to a close, she found herself walking toward the janitor's closet, where she'd first truly noticed Eli. He was there, standing in the doorway, his hand resting on the familiar mop handle. The silver bracelet, David's bracelet, caught the evening light. Around them, the building quietly buzzed with renewed purpose. Somewhere upstairs, committees were already planning the company's new direction. The security team was implementing more humane protocols. The HR department was revising policies to protect whistleblowers. Eli looked at the small closet thoughtfully. This humble space had been his sanctuary, the place where he'd worked with dignity despite everything life had thrown at him. Now, with his name cleared and a new position waiting, it represented both an end and a beginning. He reached for the mop one last time, his movements deliberate and respectful. This simple tool had been his companion through long nights of struggle and quiet prayer. With gentle care, he placed it against the wall. "Time to start fresh," he said softly. The words hung in the air, carrying the weight of transformation not just for Eli or Rebecca, but for everyone whose lives had been touched by their story of redemption. Sunlight streamed through the newly renamed Turner Foundation for Hope's glass walls, casting warm patterns across the polished floors. 6 months had transformed more than just the building's name. Where cold marble and steel once spoke of corporate power, natural wood accents and living walls now created an atmosphere of welcome and healing. Eli Turner walked through the lobby, greeting the morning cleaning crew by name. No longer in janitorial blues, he wore a simple button-down shirt with his sleeves rolled up, comfortable but professional attire that suited his new role as director of facilities. The silver bracelet still gleamed on his wrist, a constant reminder of the grace that had changed his life. "Morning, Mr. Turner," called Jenny, who'd stayed on as the foundation's administrative coordinator. Maya's art class just sent over their latest mural design for the children's wing. Eli smiled, accepting the colorful sketches. His daughter's distinctive style was evident in the cheerful angels and rainbow bridges that decorated the borders. At 12, Maya had blossomed into quite the artist, her health finally stable enough for her to attend school regularly and pursue her passions. "These are beautiful," he said, studying the drawings. "Please thank Mrs. Rodriguez and her students for me." The elevator carried him to the 4th floor, where the foundation's main offices occupied what had once been executive territory. The space had been redesigned with an open floor plan, replacing corner offices with community areas and meeting spaces. Photos lined the walls, images of families helped by their programs, veterans finding new purpose, single parents graduating from their job training courses. Rebecca was already in the main conference room, preparing for their morning staff meeting. She traded her designer suits for more casual business wear, though she carried herself with the same quiet confidence. The change in her went deeper than clothes. There was a softness in her eyes now, a peace that came from living with purpose rather than just profit. The Veterans Housing Initiative numbers just came in, she said as Eli entered, looking up from her tablet with enthusiasm. "We've placed 35 families this quarter alone." "That's wonderful," Eli replied, setting his coffee down. "Marcus tells me the job placement program is exceeding expectations too. 90% retention rate after 6 months. They shared a moment of satisfied silence, both remembering how this all began. The transformation of Lawson Technologies into the Turner Foundation had been Rebecca's vision, a way to honor both David's sacrifice and the second chances that had brought healing to so many lives. The board had initially resisted, but public support had been overwhelming. Now, the foundation stood as a model of corporate responsibility and social change. The morning meeting filled quickly with program directors and team leads. Where once there had been profit projections and market analyses, now they discussed community impact and lives changed. Maya's art therapy program for sick children had expanded to 3 hospitals. The single-parent support network had opened its 5th center. Veterans were finding purpose as mentors and teachers. "And now," Rebecca said, reaching the end of the agenda, "I'd like to share something personal." She pulled an envelope from her folder, her fingers trembling slightly. "While cleaning out some old files, I found this." She handed Eli a weathered photograph. His breath caught as he recognized the scene. A younger David Lawson, surrounded by children in Honduras, his smile radiant with the same warmth that had touched Eli's life so briefly, yet profoundly. On the back, in David's neat handwriting, were the words, "The greatest legacy is kindness." The room grew quiet as Eli studied the photo. Rebecca's voice was soft when she spoke again. David never knew how far his kindness would reach. One act of sacrifice created ripples that would change countless lives. Eli ran his thumb over the inscription, remembering the flood, the weight of baby Maya in his arms, and the stranger who had given everything to save them. "He knew what mattered most," Eli said quietly, "and now we get to carry that forward." Around the table, heads nodded. Many of their staff had come through the foundation's programs themselves, former executives working alongside those they once would have ignored, all united in the mission to extend the same grace they'd received. Through the conference room windows, Eli could see the city skyline, bright against the morning sky. Somewhere in that urban landscape, Mrs. Palmer was probably tending her garden while waiting for Maya to return from her morning art class. His daughter would bounce through the door later, full of stories and sketches, her breathing strong and clear in the summer air. Rebecca sorted through some papers, then held up another document. "The children's wing renovation is ready for final approval. Maya's design will be perfect for the main entrance." She smiled at Eli. "Your daughter has quite a gift for bringing hope to life through her art." "She learned from the best," Eli replied, thinking of all the hours Rebecca had spent reading to Maya in the hospital, helping her discover her talent for drawing, even when she was too weak to leave her bed. The meeting continued with updates from various departments: the education initiative, the housing program, the medical assistance fund. Each report represented lives touched, families restored, hope rekindled. It was everything David had lived for, everything he'd died believing in. Eli kept the photo close as they worked through the morning's agenda. The man in the image had never known how his choice would echo through time, how his sacrifice would create not just a moment of rescue, but a legacy of transformation. Now, every day, the foundation that bore Eli's name worked to multiply that initial act of kindness, turning one man's courage into 1,000 second chances. After the meeting, Rebecca caught up with Eli in the hallway. "David would be proud," she said softly, "not just of what we've built, but of who you've become." Eli touched the bracelet on his wrist, the symbol that had first connected their stories. "Thank you," he said simply, "for believing in me, even when the world didn't." Through the windows, sunlight painted the walls with warm, golden patterns. Somewhere in the building, phones rang with calls for help, and staff members worked to answer them. The foundation hummed with purpose, each day writing new chapters in an ongoing story of grace. "Ready for the afternoon sessions?" Rebecca asked, checking her watch. They had a full schedule of program reviews and new initiative planning ahead. Rebecca stood at the podium beneath a bright autumn sky, her voice carrying across the vacant lot where dozens of folding chairs held community members, employees, and local officials. Behind her, a large sign read, "Future Home of the Turner Academy for Second Chances." "Every person deserves a fresh start," she said, her fingers brushing the silver bracelet she now wore alongside her own, a gift returned by Eli. "This academy will provide vocational training, night classes, and support services for those rebuilding their lives." In the front row, Maya beamed up at her father, who sat tall in his new Navy suit. At 12, she'd grown stronger, her respiratory problems finally under control. She squeezed Eli's hand as Rebecca continued speaking. "We're not just building classroom," Rebecca explained, gesturing to the architectural renderings displayed on easels. "We're creating a sanctuary of hope, a place where past mistakes don't define future possibilities." After the ceremony, Eli walked the perimeter of the construction site with a group of young men, former inmates and troubled youth who'd been hired as part of the foundation's training program. His work boots crunched on gravel as he pointed out different areas. "See that corner there?" he said, stopping beside a concrete pad. "That'll be our facilities training center. You'll learn everything from basic maintenance to advanced systems management." He smiled at their attentive faces. "And yes, that includes proper mopping technique." The young men chuckled, but their eyes held respect. They'd heard Eli's story, knew his journey from janitor to director hadn't diminished his appreciation for honest work. "The most important thing to remember," Eli continued, "is that every job has dignity when it's done with pride. I used to clean these floors." He tapped his foot on the ground. "Now I help design them, but both matter equally." Across the lot, Rebecca had gathered with a different group, teenage girls from local shelters and foster homes. She'd started a mentorship program, meeting weekly with young women who reminded her of herself before success hardened her heart. "Your past experiences," she told them, sitting with them in a circle of plastic chairs, "they're not weights to hold you down. They're tools to build understanding." She caught Eli's eye across the distance, and they shared a knowing look. Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most important destinations. Throughout the afternoon, Foundation employees arrived in work clothes, ready to help with initial site preparation. Lawyers wielded shovels alongside accountants. Marketing executives hauled wheelbarrows of mulch for the community garden space. The hierarchy that once divided them dissolved in shared purpose. Maya flitted between groups, offering water bottles and encouragement. She'd become the heart of the foundation, her natural compassion drawing people together. Children from the neighborhood had started calling her Miss Maya, following her lead in small acts of kindness. As evening approached, most volunteers had headed home. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, casting long shadows across the construction site. Rebecca found Eli standing alone, looking over the property that would soon transform lives. "I had a dream like this once," she said, moving to stand beside him. "Back when David and I first got engaged, we talked about leaving the corporate world, building something meaningful." She paused, emotion catching in her throat. "He would have loved this." Eli nodded, understanding in his eyes. He saw value in people others overlooked, like he saw in me that day in Honduras. Rebecca turned to face him, her expression soft with revelation. "He saved your life to save mine." Eli smiled gently. wisdom earned through years of trials evident in his voice. Maybe grace has a plan for both of us. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower, painting the future school's foundation in golden light. The sign for the Turner Academy for Second Chances cast a long shadow, like a bridge stretching from past to future, from pain to purpose, from loss to hope. Behind them, Maya's voice called out cheerfully. Mrs. Palmer brought dinner for everyone still here. The elderly neighbor who'd helped raise Maya now volunteered regularly at the foundation, her kitchen becoming famous for feeding both body and soul. You know, Rebecca said as they turned to join the others, I think this is exactly where we're supposed to be. Eli sat at his desk in the Turner Foundation's facilities department, sorting through the morning mail when an envelope with a prison return address caught his eye. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Memories of his own time behind bars still raw, despite the months of healing. The letter inside was written in careful, cramped handwriting. Dear Mr. Turner, my name is Marcus Chen. Like you, I was convicted of fraud while working for a supplier connected to Arthur Dean. I've been following your story in the news. When I saw how you were cleared, it gave me hope. I've been in here for 3 years for crimes I didn't commit. Eli leaned back in his chair, drawing a deep breath. The familiar ache of injustice stirred in his chest, but now it was different. It had purpose. He reached for his phone and dialed Rebecca's extension. I need your help with something, he said when she answered. 20 minutes later, they sat in her office, reviewing Marcus's case files on her computer. Rebecca's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up court documents and financial records. Look at this, she pointed to the screen. Same pattern as your case. Falsified shipping records, forged signatures. Arthur's fingerprints are all over it. Eli nodded, jaw tight. He destroyed so many lives. But now we can help fix them, Rebecca said softly, touching his arm. I'll call Sarah Martinez. She's the attorney who helped clear your name. She'll know exactly how to handle this. Over the next few weeks, Eli threw himself into helping Marcus's case. He spent lunch breaks organizing paperwork and evenings on calls with Sarah, piecing together the truth. Other former employees began reaching out too, sharing similar stories of Arthur's deception. One morning, Rebecca found Eli surrounded by case files in the break room, dark circles under his eyes. You're really pouring your heart into this, she observed, sliding him a fresh cup of coffee. Eli looked up, managing a tired smile. I know what it's like to lose everything. Your freedom, your dignity, your chance to watch your child grow up. If I can help even one person avoid that pain. You're helping many, Rebecca assured him. Word spreading about what we're doing here. The foundation's getting calls from other companies wanting to start similar programs. As spring arrived, Marcus was released from prison with a full exoneration. Eli met him at the gates, remembering his own first taste of freedom. Marcus's teenage daughter clung to her father, crying, while his wife thanked Eli repeatedly. We've got a job waiting for you in maintenance if you want it, Eli told him. And there's room in our night classes to finish your degree. Marcus gripped his hand tight. Thank you for not forgetting about people like us. The story made local news, bringing attention to the foundation's work. More letters arrived from other former employees and their families. Eli started a support group for those affected by corporate fraud. Meeting Wednesday nights in the foundation's community room. Rebecca often watched from her office window as Eli led these meetings, his quiet strength giving others courage to share their stories. She saw how he listened with deep understanding, offering practical help alongside emotional support. One evening, after a particularly moving session where a young mother shared her story of losing everything, Rebecca found Eli sitting alone in the empty room. You've built something beautiful here, she said, taking a seat beside him. I never wanted to be a leader, he admitted. I just wanted to help people heal. That's exactly why they trust you, Rebecca replied. You're not doing it for recognition. You're doing it because you care. When Eli arrived home that night, Maya was waiting at the kitchen table, surrounded by colored paper, markers, and glitter glue. Mrs. Palmer, who still watched her after school despite Maya's improved health, was cleaning up dinner dishes. Daddy, Maya exclaimed, quickly hiding whatever she was working on. You're not supposed to see yet. Sorry, sweetheart, he laughed, covering his eyes dramatically. Should I come back later? No, I'm finished. She bounced in her chair excitedly. Mrs. Palmer helped me with the spelling. Eli uncovered his eyes to find Maya holding out a handmade card covered in sparkles and hearts. Across the front, in careful letters, World's Best Dad. Inside, she'd drawn their little family, Eli, Maya, and Rebecca, whom Maya still occasionally called Aunt Becca, standing in front of the foundation building. Little stick figures streamed in and out of the doors, with hope written in wobbly letters above them. "Do you like it?" Maya asked anxiously. "I made it because you help people now, just like that nice man helped us before." Eli pulled his daughter into a tight hug, his heart full. "I love it, sweetheart." "It's perfect," Maya grinned up at him. "Now we help other kids, right, Daddy?" Eli kissed the top of her head, marveling at her simple wisdom. "That's right, baby. Now we help other kids." The autumn breeze carried the sound of children's laughter across the freshly landscaped grounds of the Turner Academy for Second Chances. Colorful banners fluttered against the red brick building, proclaiming, "Welcome to our new beginning, and hope starts here." The morning sun caught the gleaming windows of the three-story structure, its modern design softened by trailing ivy and warm wooden accents. Eli adjusted his tie, still not quite comfortable in formal wear, as he watched volunteers arranging chairs on the lawn. Maya, wearing a new purple dress for the occasion, bounced excitedly beside him. "Look at all the people, Daddy," she exclaimed, pointing to the growing crowd. Parents, children, city officials, and media representatives filtered through the front gates, filling the rows of white chairs. Rebecca emerged from the building, elegant in a navy blazer, her usual CEO polish now warmed by the gentle smile she'd grown into over the past year. She squeezed Maya's hand as she passed. "Ready for your big moment?" she asked the girl. Maya nodded enthusiastically. "I practiced my song all week with the other kids." The city mayor, Angela Martinez, arrived with her entourage, shaking hands and pausing for photos. The school choir, 20 children including Maya, assembled near the makeshift stage, their matching uniforms crisp and new. "Mr. Turner," called Mrs. Watson, the head teacher they'd hired. "The children are asking for you." Eli walked over to the choir, where several kids immediately surrounded him. Many were children of former inmates he'd helped free, others from nearby shelters and struggling families. He knew each of their stories, had helped their parents find work or housing through the foundation. "Remember," he told them quietly, "it's not about singing perfectly, it's about singing with joy." The ceremony began as the brazen autumn sun reached its peak. The choir opened with amazing grace, Maya's clear voice rising above the others. Eli noticed Rebecca dabbing her eyes with a tissue, and his own vision blurred watching his daughter, healthy, happy, and shining with purpose. Mayor Martinez spoke first, praising the foundation's vision of combining education with community support. "This school represents the best of what our city can be," she declared, "a place where past mistakes don't determine future possibilities." When Rebecca took the podium, a hush fell over the crowd. She looked out at the gathered faces, former inmates now employed by the foundation, their families, community leaders, and most importantly, the children who would fill these halls. 12 years ago, she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "My fiancé, David Lawson, died saving 2 lives during a flood in Honduras. One was a newborn baby girl, the other was her father, a man who would later become one of my dearest friends and most trusted partners in this foundation." She gestured to Eli, and the crowd applauded. Maya beamed up at her father. David believed that every life had value, that every person deserved a second chance. He died living that belief, but his sacrifice set in motion a chain of grace that brings us here today. Rebecca paused, collecting herself. "When Eli Turner came into my life, I was a different person. Success meant profit margins and market share. But through him, through his daughter Maya, and through the hundreds of lives we've touched together, I learned what David always knew, that true success is measured in lives transformed." The audience sat transfixed as Rebecca continued. "This academy isn't just a school. It's a promise to every child and parent who walks through these doors. Your past does not define you. Your mistakes don't limit you. And you are never, ever alone." Tissues appeared throughout the crowd. Even the mayor wiped her eyes. "I want to thank Eli Turner," Rebecca said, turning to face him. When the world turned its back on him, he responded with dignity and forgiveness. When he could have sought revenge, he chose to help others. He showed me that sometimes the greatest leaders aren't found in boardrooms, but in quiet acts of faith and service. Eli stood still, overwhelmed by her words, feeling the weight of the silver bracelet on his wrist, David's bracelet, now a symbol of their shared journey. Rebecca concluded by announcing a new scholarship fund in David's name for children of incarcerated parents. The applause was thunderous. When she returned to her seat, Eli approached the podium. He wasn't planned as a speaker, but Rebecca had insisted. He cleared his throat, looking out at the sea of faces. "I'm not much for public speaking," he began softly, "but I need to say this. A year ago, I was invisible, a janitor with a sick daughter and a past I couldn't escape. Then Rebecca Lawson saw me, really saw me. She didn't just believe in me, she taught me to believe in myself again." He turned to her, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for showing me that grace isn't just about second chances. Sometimes it's about giving us the family we never knew we needed." Maya ran up then, unable to contain herself any longer, and hugged her father's legs. The crowd laughed warmly as Eli lifted her up. The mayor returned to the podium, holding a large pair of ceremonial scissors. "Shall we make it official?" Rebecca and Eli stepped forward with Maya between them. Together, they gripped the scissors, positioning them against the wide red ribbon stretched across the school's entrance. Maya bounced with excitement, her small hands wrapped around theirs. As the scissors sliced through the ribbon, she threw her arms up and shouted, "We did it!" The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The school choir burst into song again, their voices carrying across the lawn as hundreds of balloons were released into the crystal-clear Texas sky. The setting sun painted the new academy's garden in shades of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn where children had played just hours before. Most of the celebration crowd had gone home, leaving behind only scattered confetti that caught the evening breeze like tiny dancers, the fading echoes of their joy still seeming to whisper through the trees. Rebecca and Eli walked slowly along the winding stone path, their footsteps quiet against the cooling pavers that still held the day's warmth. The garden stretched before them like something from a storybook, with carefully planned flower beds that Maya had helped design, complete with her favorite daisies and sunflowers. A small fountain bubbled peacefully at the center, its gentle music mixing with the evening sounds of crickets and rustling leaves. Fireflies began to emerge in the twilight, dotting the carefully tended flower beds with their gentle light like nature's own celebration. The soft glow reminded Rebecca of stars, like tiny beacons of hope in the growing darkness. She watched one land on a nearby rose bush, its light pulsing slowly in a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat. "I can hardly believe this is real," Rebecca said, her voice filled with wonder as she gestured to the building behind them. The academy's windows still glowed warmly from the lights left on inside, like a lighthouse in the dusk, welcoming anyone who might need shelter. "Sometimes I wake up in the morning and wonder if I'm dreaming, if any of this actually happened." Eli smiled, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners in the way that had become so familiar to her. The same eyes that had first caught her attention in that sterile corporate lobby, now softened by months of friendship and shared purpose. "Maya asked me the same thing this morning when we arrived early to set up," he said with a gentle chuckle. "She kept touching the walls and the door frames to make sure they wouldn't disappear like something from a fairy tale." A firefly drifted between them, its light blinking on and off like a tiny lantern carried by an invisible hand. Rebecca watched it dance away toward the memorial garden where David's plaque gleamed softly in the fading light. "It's strange how life works," she mused, her voice growing thoughtful. "All those years I ran the company, thinking I was building something important, chasing profits and market share, believing that success meant bigger numbers and more power. But this..." She reached out to touch a nearby bench, one of several they'd placed throughout the garden, this one bearing a small bronze plaque dedicated to David's memory. "This feels real in a way nothing else ever has." They sat together on the bench, the warm wood still holding the day's sunshine, despite the cooling air. Around them, the garden's evening symphony was beginning, crickets tuning up their instruments for the night's performance, a distant owl beginning its nightly rounds from the old oak tree at the garden's edge. The air was sweet with jasmine and fresh-cut grass, mixed with the lingering scent of the barbecue lunch they'd shared with all the academy's supporters. "You know," Eli said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "every night since that first morning in the lobby, I've prayed for David." He touched the silver bracelet on his wrist, now polished and proudly worn instead of hidden beneath his sleeve. The initials D.L. caught the last rays of sunlight. "I thank him for saving Maya and me from that flood, for giving us a second chance at life. But mostly," he paused, choosing his words carefully like someone handling something precious and fragile, "mostly I pray for his soul to be at peace, and for yours too." Rebecca's breath caught slightly, a small gasp that seemed to hang in the evening air. She turned to look at him, seeing the same gentle strength that had first caught her attention all those months ago, now deepened by everything they'd been through together. The false accusations, the media storm, the long nights of doubt and hope intertwined. My peace? Eli nodded, his voice quiet but sure, carrying the weight of someone who had learned hard truths about forgiveness and healing. I've watched you carry his memory like a heavy backpack full of what-ifs and if-onlys. Like you're hiking up a mountain with stones in your pockets, making every step harder than it needs to be. But look what his sacrifice created. He gestured to the academy behind them, to the garden around them, to the whole new world they'd built together from the ashes of their separate griefs. Look at all the children who'll learn here, all the families who'll find hope. He'd be proud of this. Of you. A warm tear slid down Rebecca's cheek, catching the light from a nearby firefly as it passed. She didn't bother to wipe it away, letting it fall like a small blessing onto her hands. I used to be so angry, she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. At God, at the world, at myself for letting him go on that mission. I spent years building walls around my heart, thinking that if I could just make enough money, help enough people through the foundation, somehow I could balance the scales, make up for not stopping him. She looked up at the first evening star appearing overhead, bright and steady against the darkening sky. But now I think I understand what he saw in that work, that every act of kindness ripples outward forever, touching lives we'll never know about. Like the fireflies, Eli said, watching the tiny lights multiply in the growing darkness, each one joining the dance as night settled over the garden. Each one small and fragile on its own, but together they light up the whole garden. Together they make something beautiful. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fireflies dance, their ancient dance of light and shadow. The evening air grew cooler, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and possibility, of new beginnings written in the turning seasons. From somewhere inside the building, they could hear the cleaning crew laughing. Former students of Eli's janitor training program, now proud employees of the academy with steady jobs and benefits and dignity. Rebecca turned to study Eli's profile in the dim light, tracing the familiar lines of his face with her eyes. The same strong jaw, the same patient expression that had stopped her in her tracks that early morning so many months ago. The same profile that had sparked something deep in her memory, something she couldn't name but knew was important. You know what's funny? She said softly, her voice barely audible above the fountain's gentle burbling. What's that? You still look familiar, she whispered, her voice catching slightly on the words that had started their whole journey together. Eli's eyes met hers in the growing darkness, warm and understanding and full of the quiet wisdom that came from surviving hard things with grace intact. A firefly landed on the bench between them, its light pulsing gently like a tiny blessing. His response came gentle as a prayer, soft as the evening breeze stirring the jasmine. Maybe grace has a way of bringing familiar souls back together. The fireflies continued their dance around them, tiny lights spelling out messages of hope that only heaven could read. Their gentle glow wrapping the garden in something that felt like peace itself. A gentle breeze rustled through the oak trees surrounding the Turner Academy for Second Chances. The late spring afternoon bathed the courtyard in golden light as hundreds of folding chairs filled with proud families faced the makeshift stage. Graduation caps dotted the crowd like confetti frozen in midair. Rebecca sat in the front row, smoothing her navy dress as she watched Eli adjust Maya's graduation robe backstage. Even from this distance, she could see his hands, trembling slightly as he straightened his daughter's collar. The past year had transformed them all, but perhaps Maya most visibly. Her once pale cheeks now glowed with health, her eyes bright with purpose. Principal Martinez approached the podium, tapping the microphone. "Welcome to the Turner Academy's first graduation ceremony," she announced, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "We have a special student speaker today, someone who embodies everything our school stands for. Please welcome Maya Turner." The audience burst into warm applause as Maya walked to the podium. At 12 years old, she was the youngest speaker, but her presence commanded attention. Eli took his seat next to Rebecca, wiping his eyes quickly with the back of his hand. "A year ago," Maya began, her clear voice steady, "I was sick a lot. My dad worked nights, cleaning floors, and we were scared all the time." She paused, looking directly at her father. But then, something amazing happened. I learned that sometimes the worst moments in life can lead to the best ones. Rebecca reached over and squeezed Eli's hand. He returned the gesture, both of them remembering those dark days that now felt like a distant storm. "My dad always told me about angels," Maya continued. He said they show up when we least expect them, sometimes wearing business suits instead of wings. Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. But he also taught me about something even more important: faith, not just in God, but in good people, in second chances, and in the power of forgiveness. The breeze picked up, carrying the scent of jasmine from the garden David's foundation had planted. Rebecca closed her eyes briefly, feeling his presence so strongly it made her heart ache with gratitude rather than grief. There was a man named David Lawson, Maya said, her voice softening. I never met him, but he saved my dad and me when I was a baby. He gave his life so we could have ours. And years later, his love found us again through Miss Rebecca. Phones captured photos, but many guests were too moved to record, simply listening as Maya spoke about transformation and hope. She described how the school had become home to dozens of children whose parents were rebuilding their lives after hardship. Some people think second chances are about forgetting the past, Maya said wisely. But I think they're about using the past to help others. That's what my dad does every day here. That's what Miss Rebecca teaches us. That's what Mr. David did when he saved us. Eli's shoulders shook slightly. Rebecca leaned closer, her own tears falling freely now. Around them, sniffles and quiet sobs punctuated the profound silence. So today isn't just about graduation, Maya concluded. It's about celebrating how love can start a chain reaction. One person's kindness can change a life. That life can change another. And before you know it, you have a whole school full of people helping each other grow. The applause was thunderous. Maya beamed as she walked back to her seat, stopping to hug her father tightly. Rebecca watched them, remembering that early morning when she'd first recognized something familiar in Eli's eyes, the same kindness that had drawn her to David years ago. After the ceremony, as families mingled and took photos, the three of them walked together through the garden path. The setting sun cast long shadows across the freshly mown lawn, and the air was filled with the sound of happiness, genuine, hard-won happiness. They stopped at the entrance, where a bronze plaque gleamed in the evening light. Rebecca traced the letters with her finger, feeling the warmth of the metal that had soaked up the day's sunshine. The words, now so familiar, still moved her deeply. In memory of David Lawson, whose final act of love started a chain of grace that never ends. Maya slipped her small hand into Rebecca's, then took her father's hand on her other side. Together they stood, connected by more than touch, bound by a story of redemption that had transformed not just their lives, but an entire community. As the sun dipped lower, casting its final rays across the academy grounds, Rebecca felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She looked at Eli, who met her gaze with understanding. No words were needed. In that moment, they both knew that David's sacrifice had bloomed into something beautiful. A legacy of love that would continue touching lives for generations to come. Maya squeezed their hands, smiling up at the golden sky. Around them, the garden David's foundation had planted swayed gently in the evening breeze, and the last light of day wrapped them in its warm embrace. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Eli Turner, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.